Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Children and Family Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. It is the last such scrutiny meeting of the current cycle of the Council. So before we move on to apologies for absence, I think I would like to do some thanks for people who have made this committee and children's services work really well over the last 4 years. So I'd like to start off by thanking Richard Boyles, who is struggling with IT to get onto this call. So if you don't see him, it's not through lack of effort or through his diary, it's IT issues. Richard, as a cabinet member, has worked really hard over the last 4 years and has possibly had to take on more than he might have expected when he was originally appointed to the role of the cabinet in terms of the amount of work that's involved. I would like to thank the ambassadors and Lynn Green in particular for their contribution not only to this committee but work around the committee to help other young people in care or care leavers. And I'd like to thank Lynn for including the ambassadors as the participation officer in particular. I'd like to give my thanks to the senior officers and the other and all the other staff at Children's Services who've stayed with us and joined us during this very difficult time, and in particular who have supported us through the very difficult COVID era that we're hopefully coming to the end of. And finally, I'd like to thank you, the members of the committee. I think we've been a very well-behaved committee over this 4 years. I think mostly members' contributions have been very positive. We've avoided political bickering, and I think we've all really come to this with a focus on we're here to improve children's services, to improve the lives of the most vulnerable children in our county, and that's what we should focus on. And I think there's been a genuine commitment, I think, from all sides towards that objective. So thank you to you, committee members, and particularly to you, Leslie, as our vice chair. Andrea, was there anybody else I needed to thank before we go on to apologies for absence? Oh, yes, there was, of course, and that's you and the Democratic Support Officers. So thank you so much for supporting us over the last 4 years. I don't know what we could have done without you, for faithfully writing up the minutes, prompting us when we needed to do things, and being proactive on the case, and helping this committee and the of course, the task group that we had on permanent exclusions to work really well. So I think it's really important, particularly that the chair who has to work with the senior Democratic Services officer. And I think we've had a pretty good working relationship, Andrea. So thank you very much to you. Now, is there anyone else I've forgotten? No. In which case, do I need to say anything about hands, virtual hands?
No, I think everybody knows what to do, and we'll keep an eye out. You know, it's a small committee, so if people are struggling to put their hands up IT-wise, just wave.
Yes, excellent.
Or use the chat to let me know that you know, and the chair know that you want to talk.
Yeah, don't be backwards in coming forwards.
In that case, can I say I haven't got a hand to raise?
Ah.
So I'll have to find an animal to raise a paw.
Right. Ah, okay. Is that a cat issue?
Technology issue.
Technology. Well, okay. A virtual hand, an actual hand like this will do. And if I miss it, Andrea will pick it up. Very, very good. Now, Richard Boyles has mentioned to me. But Andrea, do you want to go through the list of apologies that you've received?
Yeah, sure. So we have apologies from Councillor Alan Priest and Councillor Stephen Hurst is substituting for him today. And we also have apologies from Councillor Chris Coleman. We also have a new member on the committee, which is Councillor Phil Orford, who replaces Brian Robinson, who left the committee recently.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. Declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Okay. In which case, can we go on to the minutes of the previous meetings, and that's meetings plural. So we have 2 minutes to take today. The first one is the 1st of December 2020. Do I have any comments? No? Well, I'll consider them virtually signed, Andrea. Now, the minutes of the meeting for the 14th of January 2021. Andrea, I believe you had a proposed correction to the minutes.
Yes, it's just Charlotte Blanche needs to be added to the list of attendees.
Very good. And I'm happy to sign them. Well, first of all, are there any other points on those minutes other than Charlotte Blanche being added to the... Colin.
Sorry, it's not to do with the minutes, and I apologise for that. I've just had notice that Councillor Bernard Fisher can't make today's meeting. He's had to go and help someone, so that's just come to me. So if that could be added, I'd be very grateful.
Very good. We'll add that to the minutes today. Okay, so there are no other objections. So subject to Charlotte Blanche being added as an attendee, I virtually sign those minutes. Now, the next item is the Accelerated Improvement Plan. And do we have Gail on the call? I assume we do. Yeah, I'd like to hand over to Gail Hancock to take us through agenda item 4. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I will do that now. So I'm just
Gail, you're I'm struggling to hear you. I don't know if other people can.
You
struggling.
Hear me okay?
The connection appears.
Okay.
Gail, if you turn off your video, that would probably solve the problem. Okay, try speaking again.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Yeah, Chris can too. So feel free to proceed.
Yes, that's what I was just checking. I just wanted to check that you could hear me.
It's broken, Gail, so it's very difficult. I've switched my video off too, just to preserve bandwidth.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear the odd words.
Okay. So what I'm going to do today is accelerate.
No.
We can hear you wonderfully well. Surprise, surprise.
I think it's erratic.
Ecstatic.
Yes, proceed, Gail. If it becomes difficult for us, I'll need to ask Chris if there's another officer that can present. But for now, I think it's best to try and continue.
Thank you. Okay, so the Accelerated Improvement Plan that you have in your pack is from December, which is quite out of date now. We had an improvement board meeting in February, on the 23rd of February. And what I'm going to do to make sure that you have the most up-to-date available information is pick out some highlights, because of course things have moved on since December. The key highlights.
My tabs.
Sorry?
It's okay, Gail.
Okay, so
Chris, he wasn't muted. I've muted him.
Right.
Okay.
If we mute when we're not speaking,
I thought someone was trying to tell me that the sound wasn't good again. Okay, so the headlines with the updated information taken from that I presented at the improvement board on the 23rd of February is we have made good progress in meeting short-term quality assurance targets. So we undertake monthly audits, as you will be aware, quality of our, and we have a target of 12% of inadequate audits by January, 12% or less. And the good news is that our performance in that area was 10%, which is an improvement on the previous month. So we've hit that target and exceeded it. We also have a target for quality assurance regarding good and outstanding practice. And again, we've exceeded that short-term target, which is 40%, and performance, when it was last reported, was at 48%. So that is a significant improvement as well. So from the quality assurance side of things, the evidence that we have is showing that we are moving in the right direction and have met and indeed exceeded those targets. In terms of focusing on improvement, because it's quite a long agenda and there's lots of other business to discuss, I'm going to focus, if I may, on some of the improvement activity highlights. So participants in the meeting will remember that we had an Ofsted focused visit in October, and there were 4 areas that were identified by Ofsted: pre-proceedings, edge of care, placement sufficiency, and personal education plans. So I'm just going to focus on those areas of improvement. The good news is that in terms of pre-proceedings and court care proceedings, our monthly activity is now in line with our targets to review and progress the action plan that I put in place and discussed with the lead inspector. We now have a very accurate tracker, and that is to ensure that we are able to evidence the necessary grip and pace to ensure all relevant children receive legal protection in a timely manner. There's been a great deal of work undertaken between Children's Social Care, our legal department, CAFCAS, and the judiciary to ensure that all current court care proceedings remain on track. The judiciary has been very severely hit by the pandemic, but we've had a really good, robust recovery plan, which all key partners have pulled together and worked on very well. We do have a lot of court practice going through the family court system. The other key piece of improvement activity over recent months has been our focus on permanence planning. So this is to ensure that where children are in our care and where we have no plan to reunify them with their birth families, that we are able to provide them with the necessary permanence and stability to ensure that they are well cared for and at their permanent placement of destination. So we have had a project, a permanence planning project, which has now completed 12 permanence panels. So all children with a permanence plan to remain in our care have been reviewed, and we will repeat that process in April. This is specifically to make sure that we have children at their permanent placement of destination, and that where there is any drift and delay, we know what that is and we have an effective plan to address that. We have a range of remedial actions that have come out of the 12 permanent placement panels, and we will be reviewing them again in April. The other related issue connected with our permanent project is in respect of the budget. We are now able to accurately forecast what the future ongoing budget requirements are to meet all of those children's placement needs, not only for the next financial year, but also in respect to the remainder of their minority. And that's a really important issue to ensure that we have the correct budget to meet those statutory requirements. In terms of Educare, which the Ofsted inspectors referred to as our second front door, we have been reviewing our arrangements to ensure that we're able to divert as many young people as possible away from care so we can support them to remain in the care of their birth families, to provide some additional support for children who are in our care and require a wraparound support offer to stabilise their placement and to prevent them from disrupting, and also where in the child's best interest, where we can move children back to the care of their birth families, that we have effective reunification plans in place. We have done some research to identify a model of Educare practice that has the best evidence base behind it in terms of what works. And we will be progressing the intensive family preservation service approach. And we will be doing that ASAP. We already have the vast majority of the elements of that approach available to us within the service. So I'm not anticipating a long lead in time. So we should be up and operational with that once we've done the training and the collaboration with our existing workforce. In terms of the placement efficiency, I'm not going to go into that in any detail because that is something that is on our agenda for today. We do have, coming out of the Ofsted focus visit, an area of improvement regarding personal education plans. The virtual school now has a management board in place. It's had its second meeting, and personal education plans is clearly a key item for that management board. There's been a lot of activity undertaken by my education colleagues, and the improvement board is likely to be looking at the progress that's been made and hopefully be able to see some evidence of the impact of those improvements at the next improvement board. There has been growing concern regarding safeguarding young people out of the home. What that refers to is children who are at risk of exploitation. We've done some significant work, not only within our service, but also across the Safeguarding Partnership, and are developing a young person strategy so that we can take a multi-agency approach regarding the improvements that are necessary and our working together processes and systems to ensure that we are working hand in glove. Some of that will be about improving our ability to disrupt adults causing concern who are exploiting our young people locally, and also picking up the ever-present threat of county lines, which is where our young people are moving to different parts of the country outside of Gloucestershire in order to carry drugs or money or weapons or a combination of all three, usually as part of some organised crime gang. So I'm working very closely at the moment with the head of our public protection unit in place, and we have a shared resource of police officers and social workers, and we're looking to redirect that resource to take even more targeted approach. There are some areas of our performance that continue to be hard to tackle. This focuses specifically on repeat work, namely re-referrals, repeat child protection planning, some placement stability issues. I won't say very much more about that now because I note that we have a performance report later on this agenda. So what I'd like to complete with is to provide some summary information about some very targeted work that has been going on in children's social care for just about 3 to 4 months now. I've been tracking some individual staff and some individual teams that we have noted from our available quality assurance and performance data are likely to be where some of the weakest practice is coming from. We now have only 2 names on the social worker tracker and a much smaller number of teams. So that does show in terms of distance travelled, we are having some impact and moving in the correct direction. We have our lead improvement advisor leading on a project called the Team Improvement Project. This is where we are, in addition to all of the other improvements that are ongoing across the service, this is where we're asking our lead improvement advisor to take some targeted and more focused approaches with individual teams. We're now at the stage where we can see that some improvements have been made, that some of the original teams in that first cohort are now, we're satisfied that they've made adequate progress, and we are moving them out of the Team Improvement Project. There will be some teams from the original cohort that need to continue to receive that targeted and focused approach. And there are some other teams that we will be adding into the Team Improvement Project cohort. But it does prove that we have made progress, it is the right approach to take, and that we're going to continue this for a further 3 to 4 months. Because what we are seeing is that gradually we have moved away from the inadequate critical concerns and are moving now into a more clearly evidenced requires improvement space in terms of overall judgments. So I'm hoping, Chair, that that is satisfactory in terms of bringing everybody up to speed with the current information, but I'm happy to take any questions or queries that you may have, and I hope the sound held out.
Thank you very much, Gail. Yes, that was very clear and succinct, and the sound did in fact improve. I think it was just at the start really that we had some problems, so that's great. Now, I only have one hand indicating at the moment, and that's Colin. So, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. There's 1 or 2 things, and I know started off by talking about the 10% inadequate rate in the audits from a target of 12. But what we've had before, the inadequates drop lower than the 10%, and then they pop back up again. And I suppose there's a question of good and because the difference between a requires improvement and an inadequate may not be great. So you know, I just want to make sure that you have a sustained improvement. And one other question is what happens or even requires improvement, and particularly for the children that those reports are on. So I want to make sure that when they're found, to the children to make sure that that doesn't happen. I think it's really good about that. I do have a question about the pre-proceedings and the way in which the courts are working stroke not working. Clearly, that's been an issue. I do think it's quite outrageous that the courts have been so badly affected and proceeding. And these are sometimes really being crossing, and that has such an effect on victims, children, and all the rest. Because I think we should raise the service.
So thank you, Colin. We lost you for a little bit of the last 2 or 3 minutes. I think Chris Spencer and Rob England would both like to reply to some of those points, and after that, I've got Stephen and Leslie. So, Chris, do you want to respond first?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to the first question that Colin put to members. I don't want to steal Gail or Rob's thunder on this, but the inadequate proportion of casework. If you recall, I frequently reference the starting point of, and it's almost 3 years ago today that I started in Gloucestershire. In fact, it was the 6th of March, so 3 years all bar 2 days. But when I arrived, we had about 50% of our casework was inadequate. And we rarely had a good case. We had 1 or 2, good cases occasionally. The rest were RI. So that's how far we've come. If you look now at that table in the Accelerated Improvement Plan, you have to really consider the data on a quarterly basis, which is something Rob says regularly rather than monthly. And if you do that, then you do get a steady downward trend from 3 years ago. And we're currently aiming to be in single figures. We've got a slightly higher target, Gail's quite right, of 12%. We're now below that. I feel more comfortable when we're in single digits. But the other thing to celebrate, which Gail didn't mention, I don't think, is that we now have approaching 40% of our casework that is considered good. So it's not just that we're decreasing significantly the amount of inadequate work, but we're increasing the amount of work that is good. And that will continue as long as we keep giving it the focus that we are in the way that we are across a whole range of practice elements that are within the AIP. So sorry, I know this question comes up regularly, and I always give the same answer, but I always think it's useful in terms of distance traveled to consider where we've come from. The other thing I would say, and I'll be quiet, is that it's still okay for a good service even to have, well, it's not okay, but you often find that good services, once inspected, also include a proportion of inadequate casework. You don't have to have zero inadequate casework to be authority, though of course you would aspire to do so. So I'm sorry if I sound like a broken record, but every time the question's asked, I feel the so thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gail. Chris, I think that Rob and Gail both wanted to come back and make further points in response to that question.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Without stealing too far into the quality assurance report, to answer the question or 2 questions directly about how secure are we in the rate of inadequate practice, and secondly, how are we assuring ourselves that children who are in receipt of a weaker service are getting a better service? So if I take the first one, I think that Chris is absolutely right. The trajectory indicates positive improvement, and that's very optimistic. This is a fairly important moment for us as an authority in terms of the figures that we're looking at. But I'm I believe that we're not yet secure in those ratings. However, I am optimistic. And if I qualify the optimism, it's because I've been spending quite a bit of time trying to understand the variability that Colin has described as one month inadequate is low, the next month it may be high. And what I've drawn my conclusion on with that is that across our work has been a pool of weak practice, which you'll see described in the quality assurance report, which is a combination of work that is deemed inadequate and that which is weak requires improvement, so at risk of becoming inadequate. And that pool has been fairly widespread at about 45% consistently for quite a long time now. But in the last 2 months, we've seen that pool shrink also. So not only are we seeing a shrinkage in the number of inadequates, we're seeing a shrink in the number of audits finding weak practice. So that absolutely shows improvement. But as I say, I think we're on a pivot here, so we're not yet secure. What I would really welcome is that we could see figures like this for the next 3 to 6 months. That would offer far greater assurance. The answer to the second question is we have a very robust process around children of concern. And children of concern are any children who an audit has identified inadequate practice for. So those children are scrutinized very regularly at multiple levels through the organization, including directors, and they're only signed off as no longer children of concern once the identified issues have been resolved for them. So there's a very robust process in place for those children. I would have to argue that for those who are in receipt of a requires improvement service, we do see some improvements, but that's variable. That remains an area of attention for us. So I hope that answered both of those questions.
Thank you. I think, Gail, you also wanted to come back with a response?
Yes, please. Rob has already addressed the initial points that I was going to, so I won't repeat any of that. But I did manage to catch Colin's comments regarding the court system. And I just wanted to provide some information by way of assurance, because I'm referring to the family proceedings court. I'm not referring to the criminal court. And what I can say is that family proceedings matters have not been pushed to the long grass. We have weekly liaison meetings. So when I say we, this is Children's Social Care, Legal Services, CAFCAS, and the judiciary. And we review all children who are subject to current court care proceedings. And we also review together any new matters that need to be issued and where we need to find court time. We have in Gloucestershire through pandemic really developed an excellent virtual courtroom facility, both within Gloucestershire Hall and the Cheltenham locality. This has been something that has been commented on very positively by Ofsted, our DFE advisors, and indeed other local authorities who come to us and ask us what we've done, how we've done it. So this is something that's actually been written up in a number of national reports. So the British Association of Social Workers, we've run an article there, and we've also been subject to a review report that was published in Community Care, which is within the sector, a particular publication that most people in the sector would read quite routinely. So I would like to provide some assurance that where we have children that require legal protection, they are receiving legal protection. And whilst there was disruption at the beginning of the pandemic, during the
Gail, you've just started breaking up. No, I think we've lost Gail.
Lockdown, all those courses that went prior to the first lockdown.
Right. We lost you just at the end, but I think you probably covered most of the points. So thank you for that. I think that was a very comprehensive response by the three of you covering off those questions. That's very good. Can I come on to Stephen now, who has a separate question?
Thank you, Chair. I have to say, I read this and I thought, you know, almost like at last we're beginning to see that turn and some consistency in the improvement in the figures, and I thought that was reassuring, and also does reflect the last Ofsted report. I had a specific question on page 11 where we're talking about training completed, and I was a little concerned because I do think this is about process, not individual actions. The number of staff who'd completed different elements of the training. Should we be concerned about that? Are we training our staff at the rate that we would want to?
So it's Chris here, Chair. I'm not sure whether Gail is hearing that question, but the answer is no, we're not training as regularly if we're referring to the Essentials programme that we offer through the Social Work Academy. But it is a modular programme, so at any one point in time, we do have a proportion of our workforce that's completed module 1, 1 and 2, or 1, 2 and 3, and we don't record the training as completed until they've completed all 3 modules. So there's always a proportion of our workforce that would be considered untrained as they're going through the training. And of course we do have, last time I checked, about a 17% turnover rate still, which is pretty much in keeping with national average now. But if you take 17% off the 100, plus another cohort of social workers who are going through that training, you know, you would want to see a figure around about 75 to 80% completion, but we're below that. So we have had a discussion about that recently in our executive improvement group, and there is a refresh and a reinvigorated approach by heads of service to make certain that social workers are engaging in the essentials of social work training.
Thank you for that.
Yes. Do you got any follow up to that, Stephen, or is that fine?
No. The key point was, is it where it should be? And the answer, I think, is honest that it isn't. But I do understand that we will never get to where it we think it might want to be because of the turnover of staff. So that was really useful. Thank you, Chris.
Right. Thank you. Now I've got Leslie. I have a question myself over one of the points that you brought up, Gail. So just checking if there's anybody else. Has someone just raised a hand? I had a Colin. Is that a legacy?
I noticed that Colin had raised his hand again, Chair.
Right. Okay. So I've got Leslie and then Colin again, and then I will follow up with one last question. Leslie.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Gail, thank you very much, and thank you for all you've been doing. It's I think it's given a step change that was much needed. You referred, when you were talking about the families, about permanence planning, and I wondered what was being done to support families in total, because so often we see, you know, there are complex problems, and I wondered whether or not the intensive preservation family approach included supporting families if there's sort of alcohol abuse, etc. So if you could give a bit of background to that, I think it would be helpful. You also referred to having been able to identify where the weakest practice is, and I wondered whether or not you've got what the balance of agency staff with permanent staff was, if you could help with that one. And sort of looking to the future, where are your areas of concern that a new committee should keep an eye on? And what advice would you give to a new family Children and Families Committee on the basis of forewarned is forearmed?
Leslie, very good question for the last committee meeting, CFOSC, of this council. So yes, Gail. If Gail
Hear me?
isn't available, Chris. Hello, Gail.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll do my best to answer you, Leslie. So in terms of the intensive family preservation service approach, one of the key features of its success is its ability to respond quickly to families in crisis, and quickly means within 24 hours. To have one single point of contact, a member of staff who is personally known to the family and who is able to respond within the 24 hours and stay with the family for an intensive period of anything up to 6 weeks in the first instance. So it's very much a crisis intervention model. And all of the evidence regarding crisis intervention is that you can often move mountains within a crisis intervention period when you may have spent several years not making very much progress. So the named worker would have other people supporting them. That may, of course, Leslie, involve the more specialist services. So if, for example, there was a parent who was struggling with their use of alcohol, we would be able to bring in those specialist services. Some of the things that we already have is functional family therapy, so working with parents and their children. We also would need to be focusing on money management. It's a key source of stress within families, particularly now regarding fuel poverty and food poverty brought about through loss of jobs through the pandemic. And also understanding and appreciating that parenting teenagers is not always an easy task. And sometimes parents, any parent may need some support from time to time. But the model has been evaluated by the What Works Centre, and it is the model that has the most secure evidence base behind it. So we've been doing quite a lot of research in that area to make sure that when we pin our colours to the mast, we are making sure that we're giving ourselves the best possible opportunity to be of most support to the families who are really trying hard to keep hold of their young people. And it is a model that is aimed at older young people, the teenagers, and that, of course, for Gloucestershire is where we have got the most significant pressures in terms of families not being able to cope and asking for children to come into our care. So that's really trying to provide wraparound support within families to try and prevent that direction of travel and keep our children in care numbers as low as they possibly can be and need to be. In terms of the weakest practice.
I was just going to say,
sorry, Leslie.
Thank you for letting me interrupt, and thank you, Andrew. It occurred to me when you were saying that about older children, one of the most difficult areas for fostering is older children. So do you automatically put that range of support in when families are taking on older children?
Yes, we do. So our Edge of Care service provides that wraparound support both to birth families and to foster families. We don't make a distinction in that respect. The support follows the needs of the child wherever they may be. So we have that flexibility existing in the system already. In terms of your question, Leslie, regarding weakest practice, it has been variable. It isn't a static phenomenon within the system, but we have some really good quality evidence, both from quality assurance reporting and from performance reporting. So we're very able to pinpoint those individuals and teams, not just one month here and there, but if there's any indicator within the system that we've got perhaps a persisting issue, then that is where we will be focusing our attention. And that is what the team improvement project is all about. It's providing that really focused, intensive support to where we think we have the most vulnerability within the system. And the evidence on that at the moment is that that has had some traction. So in terms of trying to prove the value of the concept, we believe it is something that has shown its worth. So we will be continuing with it for a further period. In terms of agency staff, there isn't a correlation, Leslie, between those teams and services that have agency staff equaling the weakest practice. My view on that is where we have agency staff where we're paying a premium and they're not providing added value, then this isn't a bums on seats exercise. What it says is they are not meeting the standard of service that we require, and so we ought not to continue to persist with them. And so we have been very robust at exiting agency staff who are not up to standard, and where we have permanent substantive members of staff on our GCC contracts, we are now far more robust at invoking formal capability procedures where necessary and appropriate. We have, of course, got many, a lot less agency staff across the service. Chris will be able to give you the exact figure of how high that was when he first started in the service. But now, I mean, I had a meeting last week. I am robustly reviewing all requests for agency staff, and we have reduced significantly over the last year. It has been gradually coming down, but we're now month on month very securely well under 100. So we're in the 90s, early 90s at the moment. Occasionally it drops down to 80s, but on average it's about 90 at the moment. And that is obviously a significant difference. The reality is, Leslie, that we would not be able to run our services if we didn't have agency staff. We are looking towards agency providers for more experienced social workers. And that's because we have no problem recruiting newly qualified social workers and those that are in their first assessed and supported year in employment. That is a very well established pipeline in Gloucestershire. It was established before I came, but it is something that I've taken up, and we over recruit on newly qualified social workers because it's part of our strategy, our workforce strategy, to grow our own and to build the more experienced social workers of tomorrow. And I think that has proven itself to be a very effective approach. In terms of any advice that I would give to future colleagues, I would say that it is to keep a watchful eye on the accelerated improvement plan. That is the place that brings together quality, performance and improvement activity. We do highlight within that accelerated improvement plan all of the key issues, those things that we can celebrate because they're heading in the right direction or now more secure, but also it doesn't shy away from highlighting those areas that are not where we need them to be. And I did mention when I gave you the summary that whilst quality assurance is definitely heading in the right direction, we do have some nutty issues regarding our performance, particularly in respect of repeat activity.
Yes, thank you.
You didn't say which was your area of greatest concern.
Gail?
I think I might need to reflect on that one, Leslie. I've got lots of concerns. I tend to worry about quite a few things because there's a number of things that are not where they need to be. I'll have a think and let you know, Leslie.
Thank you, Gail. If you could let me know too, I think that would be useful because I'd like to finalise my advice to the successor chair of the committee in the new council. and I think that would be an important follow-up action to take for both of us. Now, Colin, can I come back to you? I think you did want to ask a question, I think, that arose from one of the answers.
Yes, yes, it was. And I just want to make the point that I'm often asking for reassurance. There's a lot of good work that has been. So, okay.
Colin, I'm struggling to hear you. I can't hear
any better. Okay, I think it's working. Okay. What I did say is I'm often looking for reassurance, and it's not to be taken as me just being critical. But one of the things which is really encouraging is the intensive work that happens with families, as Leslie the answer to Leslie was given. What I'm interested in is Gail clearly said that there's been a lot of attention on how effective it is. And one of the things I'd be interested in is that effectiveness. Do you ever look at the cost savings compared to the extra amount of work that goes in future? Because that could be really important for us in shaping the service as it goes forward. If there's investment to be made, if we know that it's cost effective, that's a good argument to put at budget time, that's where we need to be shifting things. And I can imagine it's very successful in terms of that family, but I just wonder whether there's been any financial assessment of how cost effective that kind of work is.
Thank you. Chris, did you want to come in with a response to that?
Yeah, I will, Chair. I mean, just going back, though, if I may, to Leslie's question, because it's an important one, and it probably is more for me to answer than for Gail, because I've got that responsibility across children's services. And I think for me and for this committee going forward in the next period, I think there's still a degree of stabilisation of the workforce to undertake, and that goes from Gail downwards, really, in relation to SLT. I mean, Gail is here as an interim. That is a critical role, and you can see Leslie referred to the additional energy that she's brought to the endeavour over the last 12 months. That has been noticeable. And so the person in that role needs to be a permanent appointment and not an interim. And so that's a big challenge. And below Gail, we still have a number of key people who are here as interim. I mean, her own deputy, Philip Segarola, again, very experienced, but an interim. Kevin Buck, that manages the MASH, is an interim. So we've got a lot of key people in key positions making a real difference that aren't here permanently. So one of the challenges for us is the stability of our senior leadership teams. And also to continue with the stabilisation of the front line as well. They're both equally as important, and one could argue that the stabilisation of senior leadership is even more critical in some respects than the front line, because that's where the energy and drive for change comes from. So, you know, we have been incredibly successful at stabilising the front line. Gail made reference to the fact to numbers when I came. We had 187 agency social workers when I walked through the door, and we managed to appoint a further 60 when we expanded the service to reduce caseloads. So that took us up to almost 250 agency social workers. It's now down, the lowest we've been, it's popped up a little bit, but the lowest we've been is 79%. Sorry, not 79%, 79 agency workers, forgive me. So we've been very successful there. So stabilisation of the workforce, both frontline and senior leadership, is critical. We'll hear in a little while from Wendy about our sufficiency strategy, but the market in Gloucestershire is not great, and we're trying our best, and the sufficiency strategy is our means of improving the market and expanding the number of good quality places that children's needs can be better matched to when we're making those placements. So the sufficiency strategy is a critical area for development as well. Of course, we've been very fortunate here, and I have been very fortunate as DCS in terms of the funding that we've received from the council and the cross-party support that we've had for that additional funding. We now need, as practice improves and we intervene more in the market, begin to see better value for money being delivered. And there is an inextricable link in between good quality practice and better value for money. You know, the better you are at matching a child to a placement and that child staying in placement, the better value for money you get, because often with breakdown of placement comes higher cost. They don't go to a cheaper placement, they go to a more expensive one. So there's a big challenge around the budget. And in terms of assurance, we do an assurance governance statement every year, which is in part a statement of how well we've provided good value for money and what the systems and processes are that we have in place to deliver that good value for money, if you like. So, you know, there are a whole bunch of individual services which Gail probably is thinking about in her mind when she said there's a lot of things that still need to be done. There's a lot of services that need to improve, and there still are areas of and elements of practice that need to improve. But by and large, those are the kind of higher level, if you like, macro challenges that we face within children's services going forward that will get us to good. And if we address them, and I think we will get to good beyond the next inspection.
Excellent.
I do stress beyond the next inspection, not before the next inspection.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, I think you've set our expectations wisely there. I was going to ask a question about county lines, but we are really quite stressed for time. We've spent an hour on the first agenda item. If we spend an hour on every agenda item, then I'm afraid we should be here all day. And I don't want to do that. I think now we'd all like to hear from Claire Burgess from the DFE. So can we move on to agenda item 5, please? Claire.
Hello, good morning, everybody. So as I've been introduced, I'm the DFE advisor allocated to Gloucestershire, and I've been involved now since April 2020. So as part of my role, I work to get alongside and support Gloucestershire in their improvement work, and also provide some sort of constructive challenge and reporting back to the Minister, which I do on a reasonably regular basis. It's roughly every quarter. So I think you've had my report in your pack. So I won't go through it in any great detail. I'm assuming perhaps it would be helpful if I just pull out the key themes that I think might be relevant for you.
Yes, please.
Yep. Okay. So from my perspective, I would say that Gloucestershire Children's Services really know themselves well, and I think that's something that has been an improving picture and has particularly been escalated, I would say, since my involvement, and not because of me, but because of the work that you know, your colleagues have been doing. And I think that's a really critical critical area, because if you know yourselves well, then you know what it is you have to focus on and what your priorities need to be. And you end up with quite a good, strong self-writing system, so that if things do dip, as we've discussed earlier, then you know that that's happening, and you can do that sort of work around, well, why is that happening? Is that for a particular reason, and you can put that right. I mean, in response to some of the questions earlier, improvement is never a linear process. So, it's a circular process of sort of continuously going around that loop of improvement and then moving forward. So you will always, in my experience of working with other councils, you will always get areas that do dip, but then, you can focus on those areas and then move them forward. And I think that links really strongly with the presentation that Gail was giving earlier around the accelerated improvement plan. That's a very, very detailed plan, more detailed than I see in many authorities. And I think it's your sort of reference around progress and areas where things are going well and where things, need further work. So I think in terms of your improvement plan and how detailed that is, and what it tells you about your system is critical. I think as you've heard from your colleagues earlier today, there's definitely been an embedding of better practice, and that's evidenced in the work that Rob and his teams do around the audits and around the performance data. So from that perspective, the trajectory from my perspective representing the DFE is really positive. And I think, the trick, as you was talking about, Leslie, going forward, is to just make sure that keeps going, and that those foundations that have been put in place to enable that work to happen just continue. Because Gloucestershire's history is that you can do improvement, but you don't always maintain it. So in terms of your questions going forward as a new committee, that might be an area that you really want to focus on. I would suggest that continuous improvement, because all authorities are doing continuous improvement. I think it was really positive and helpful that we managed to get the approval from the Minister for the DFE grant, because that has enabled you to do some significant pieces of work, particularly around your transformation programme going forward, supporting the redesign and supporting the introduction of the social work model that you're hoping to introduce, which is systemic practice. But also just giving some really experienced capacity to support your team, because it's been a really, really hard year, hasn't it, working on delivering services within a COVID environment. And we know from Ofsted and from the DFE returns that we receive that Gloucestershire's response to COVID and how that's been managed is really positive, really good, and compares really favourably with other local authorities. But doing that and managing the day job and doing improvement work, it's hard. And I think what I would reflect back to you as a committee is that your services in Gloucestershire, your leaders in Gloucestershire, your frontline practitioners in Gloucestershire have done really well in keeping all those strands going. I think inevitably, as we found today, there have been some challenges for you with the ICT, and how that has impacted on virtual working. And I know you've got solutions in place around that. It's been an issue in a number of local authorities, but I think particularly, I would say Gloucestershire is one of the local authorities I work in where it has been a particular problem. I think I would reflect back to you the good leadership that you have in your senior leadership team. They work very well together. They've really pushed forward those areas that need to be pushed forward, and working increasingly across the system and bringing education into that as well, because it is one system, and that's how you'll sustain improvement, working as one integrated system. I would have to say I've been very impressed with your social work academy and the work that they've been doing, both in terms of training, the leadership training, the essentials training, but also the extensive work that they've been doing with your newly qualified social workers and students coming in. So that in terms of, I mean, workforce is a challenge nationally. There is a real shortage of good experienced social workers, and actually growing your own social workers is one of the ways of you know, counteracting that. And I think in Gloucestershire you've probably got one of the strongest you know, social work academies that I've seen in terms of developing those social workers, you know, bringing them in both with your recruits from overseas, but also growing your own workers and just taking up all the opportunities that are there. It is nationally, it's a really, really hard, difficult situation. And I know DFE recognise that, but sadly we haven't had that national campaign that some of the other professions have had in terms of getting recruits into the profession. I mean, I think for me, you know, it's really good that the transformation programme has been developed. You've got a transformation board. I've been involved as an LGA improvement advisor with Gloucestershire for quite a long time, as well as my DFE role. And I think the improvement's been happening, but it wasn't always tied together so that you could see the impact and do the planning in a holistic way. And I think your transformation programme and your transformation board is a really positive step forward in that it allows you to do that, and it does it across the system, which is really, really helpful. I mean, my last point, I think, would be around your partnerships and the need to keep sight and oversight of your partnerships. You know, your own workforce, leaders, frontline practice, you know, the whole workforce is doing really, really well in stepping up to that continuous improvement. But we know that there are some issues where you can't do this on your own, and you do need your partners on board with that. And there is piece of, those of you on the improvement board know we've been talking a little bit about that, but you know, as the council's practice gets stronger, then your partner's practice needs to be stronger as well. And that particularly relates to how you decide where children's needs are best met in the system. And unlike, you know, like many other councils, universal services can become a bit risk averse, and maybe try and push too much up into social care. You know, that's not right for families, and it's not right. You know, it means you end up doing quite a lot of work as an authority that results in not getting a social work service. So I think that's a particular area, and also neglect, and how the partnership identifies early neglect, so that it doesn't get to the point where children have suffered quite significant harm before they come into the system, I think would be another area. And we've had those discussions, and I know there's some work going on in the partnership around those. So I think that's a brief summary for me. I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Claire, for joining us. I was doing thanks at the start. What I should have done, I suppose, is also thank those from the DFE who have worked with us to you know, highlight some of the problems and work with us to provide the motivation, I suppose, for getting a better service. That's one of the things I forgot to do, perhaps, at the start. I don't have any hands raised, but I do have one question. Myself, you mentioned that there's been a particular problem with ICT in Gloucestershire. Is that something that perhaps as a scrutiny committee we might want to look at in the new council? We have a session right at the end to consider the list of suggestions for the new committee. And I've just noticed I've got Leslie wanting to speak as well, but if you could answer that one, and then we'll come on to Leslie.
Yes, I mean, you know, I think the pandemic threw every local authority into a situation, didn't it, where there just had to be an overnight reliance on your systems, ICT systems, virtual systems. And I think perhaps what that highlighted for Gloucestershire was that some of those systems weren't necessarily as robust and as strong as they needed to be. So yes, I know you've got potentially a new provider coming on board. But yes, I do think that, because I think inevitably there will still be an element of virtual work going forward. You know, that's some of the lessons that we've learned, isn't it, from this pandemic, that we can use virtual working when it's appropriate. So I would suggest that, yes, that would be an area.
I've got Chris, did you want to come in on that? But after that, I've got Leslie and then Stephen. Stephen,
yeah, just briefly, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. Just briefly on the IT thing. I have written to Richard this morning, just bringing to his attention the negative experiences we're having with IT at the moment, and this is primarily because our contract with Sopra Steria is coming to an end, and the relationship with our provider hasn't been great and is deteriorating. That will need to be retendered at the end of this month, and or aspects of it planned to come in-house. Now, I know there's a bit of a hybrid model emerging. I think, you know, some of those functions we're bringing back in-house. So my advice around IT and whether you should scrutinise that would be wait until the new contract is embedded, and see what it does then. But it is going to be very difficult, and as I pointed out to Richard, it is affecting our performance. We're having to find fix-arounds for things like workflows coming into the MASH. There's been a lot of traffic on that issue recently. I had 33 WhatsApp communications on my phone yesterday from various social workers having problems getting onto the system, losing work, and it's incredibly frustrating, and it's sapping morale at a time where we just could do without it. Having said that, I am assured that corporately, my colleagues in IT are doing everything they can to try and address this issue. You know, I write to them regularly. They're aware of the issues. They're trying to support us. But the fundamental problem here is in the nature of the relationship with our provider. And this isn't uncommon. I had a similar problem and experience in Harrow when our provider came to the end of the contract. They perceive that they're not going to be successful when it's retendered, and so they do the absolute bare minimum in supporting the system. And you know, for what it counts, my own view is that IT should be an in-house service. The trouble is, it does take a bit of time to graduate to that, and I think corporately what the IT managers are doing and CLT are doing are trying to do that gradually by bringing some of those functions in-house at the moment, like help desk, but the engineers that maintain the hardware of an IT system are still quite hard to come by. You have to kind of grow those. So before you go completely in-house, you have to kind of consider how you're going to do that. So we're on a journey with IT, but we're at the bottom of a trough.
Thanks, Chris. You are speaking to someone who was involved in outsourcing the IT at the Wokingham District Council 20 odd years ago, but there we go. I guess things change. I've got Leslie, Stephen Hurst, Stephen Davis in that order.
Thank you very much, and I mean, thank you, Claire, for your report and your observations, and I think thank you, in a way, particularly for highlighting the stuff to do with IT. And I find it disturbing that that well, I find it disturbing that because an organisation is likely to lose the contract, they therefore give an inferior service, particularly when these are children's lives we're talking about. I mean, that really is irreprehensible. So that does concern me hugely, and it is hard on the staff. They're trying to do their best, and they're not getting the backup they need. So I mean, and thank you for putting that in the report, because it's now, it's in writing, can't be avoided. I really wanted to ask you about the partnerships, and because they are so important, and making sure that everybody is conscious of the objectives of why all this goes on. I think it's incredibly important, and if you've got a weak link, it won't help. But what I wondered, what would be your observation about with neglect? Where do you think the service, or the whole aspect of children's services, should be focusing so that neglect doesn't become a problem? At what stage of a young person's life is where do you put most emphasis? Is it in the people will know how I'm not fixated, but I am fixated on the first 1,000 days. Is it there that the effort should be going in, so you can see what's going on? Is it later? Is it when they get into school, or is it too late when they get into school? What would, in your experience, what would you say is the most important area?
Thank you, Leslie. I mean, neglect is such a complex issue, and often it's really, really hard to differentiate between poverty and neglect, and the impact of poverty on neglect. But primarily it's around parenting capacity and resilience, and experience would show, and evidence would show, research has shown, that early intervention in neglect can be really quite positive. So it's that early intervention. But neglect happens at different stages in children's lives. So it's not a uniform approach, but parenting support, parenting capacity, forensic look at children's development, because neglect's very insidious. And I think it's very subjective, and people find it quite hard sometimes, because it is quite subjective to actually identify it as a safeguarding issue. But clearly, we know it does have significant impact on children across the whole spectrum of their lives. So I think it is about prevention, as you say, capturing those parents that might need that extra support at the very beginning, but also early identification, and those professionals in universal services sort of being much more aware, much more alert to consistent neglect. And there are some very, very good tools that out there, particularly a tool that the NSPCC has developed, which I know you have a license for in Gloucestershire and are using, but it's not perhaps being used to the extent it could potentially be used by the partnership, because that is a tool that enables, whether it's a health visitor, potentially a teacher, community workers, whatever, just to do an assessment with the family, and it gives you some evidence rather than it being so subjective. So I think neglect is absolutely around prevention and early identification, but also an awareness within the professionals working with children in universal services in particular, that the significant harm that continuous neglect can have on a child, and when that becomes a safeguarding issue.
Thank you.
Can I say thank you also for highlighting the importance of the stability of the senior management team as life within this service progresses, because at the moment, as Chris has already highlighted, that's another area of permanence that we would wish to see.
Yes, absolutely.
Could I bring Chris in? I think you had something to add. And after that, I've got a question from Stephen Hurst, Stephen Davis, and Barley from the Ambassadors.
Yeah, it's to do with the partnership issue, as I'll call it, that Claire's referred to. It's often a characteristic of improving authorities that partners don't always engage fully until the service recovers. And when the service recovers, it highlights the partners' inadequacies much more. It shines a light on them. And because we're an improving authority and we're beginning to get our own house in order and perform much better, it is, as I say, shining a light on some of our partners' practice. And I've written to the Chief Operating Officer of the CCG just this week about workflows into children's social care. And I got some initial data from Kevin Buck, who heads up the MASH, which I found astonishing, and I've still got to check, and Gail might want to confirm it or otherwise. But the issue around workflows from health is that they're down considerably from where you would expect them to be. And of course, during the first lockdown, a lot of the health services retracted to acute services. So things like school nurses, health visitors, all kind of retracted to acute hospitals. And so health weren't laying eyes on children. And you've heard before as well around the issues we've had with health assessments of children in care, dental services and such like, and repeatedly children with mental health issues having a good service. So we do challenge health on a number of fronts, but the data that astonished me was that the contact rate from health is down by about 50%. And of those, the conversion rate from contact to referral, Kevin told me, was 18%, which is astonishingly low. So I need to kind of check that. And whether the data is right or not, the issue is a real one. Because what it means is not only are health seeing children and referring them because they're 50% down, but they're referring the wrong children if only 18% of contacts progress to referral. So there's a lot of work to do with health to get that right, because they do need to know and understand thresholds for referral much more clearly. Because as Gail said and has alluded to, otherwise you're overly intrusive in families and you develop this negative relationship with families if they're intervened with early for no purpose at all, really. So there's some real issues around health knowing who to refer and when, and understanding thresholds. And we've spoken about neglect. Another area is that, which illustrates this problem really, is that through the Gloucestershire Safeguarding Children Board, we agreed that we would use the neglect toolkit as a process for identifying and intervening in families where neglect is a feature. And only in 5% of cases, last time I checked, had health used that neglect toolkit. And when we challenged health on that, they said, well, we don't really have time to complete the neglect toolkit. But yet it was signed off as an agreement between the partners that they would do that. So I think there are some issues. Having said all that, I think our relationship with health, and in particular the police, is very good and improving. And I do think we're starting from a strong base in terms of goodwill. But goodwill will only take you so far. You've got to put the actions behind that goodwill. And I think that's where we are with health in particular, in getting them to step up on a whole range of issues that I've just referred to. So partnership is a key issue, and I could have added that to my list going forward if I wanted to go a little deeper down that list. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Chris. I'm quite surprised to hear about that issue with the health, and was that issue escalated at all?
Yeah, it's been considered as part of the improvement board. In fact, a couple of meetings ago, Claire chaired that in the absence of Andrew Ireland, our independent chair. So that was also another point of contact with health. So it's in hand. It is in hand, and I think the questions are being well received, but that does need to convert to action. That's where we're at.
Right, thank you. I've got several people wanting to speak. I've got Stephen Hurst, Stephen Davis, I've got Barley and Richard and Phil. So quite a few people. Could I ask you to be reasonably succinct, because time is moving on, and with several people still to speak, if you could be as concise as possible, I would be very grateful. Or have I missed someone? There's one more. No, I think that's right. But okay, can we move very swiftly on to Stephen Hurst, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll cut my question in two. For speed. I've always been amazed and surprised, and in some ways disappointed by the high number of temporary or acting people, social workers that we have. Is this typical? Is there a national problem? And how can it really be overcome? Which is a very difficult question, I know. Thank you.
Yeah. Claire?
Yeah. I mean, it is a national problem. You know, it is recognised that there is nationally a shortage of qualified social workers, and particularly experienced qualified children's social workers. I think different local authorities have done different things. Like yourselves, they've set up academies. Your academy has been particularly successful. You know, I think in terms
great.
Yes, it is great, because in terms of the numbers that Chris was giving you earlier, in terms of the number of agency social workers you have, you know, that's really positive. You are recruiting, you are growing your own social workers. So I think in some ways, Gloucestershire has turned that curve. It will always be a struggle. There have been various initiatives by the DFE, and you know, Frontline's one of those initiatives, and through the LGA and the DFE, the return to social workers, which has been trying to get social workers who've left the profession to come back in, but they're small numbers. So I think it is a national issue. I think in Gloucestershire you're doing a really good job, you know, as a local authority to tackle that issue. Some places aren't doing as well as you, and are really struggling, and as a result they have high rates of agency workers, but most importantly that means high turnover for children and young people and the families, so they're having multiple social workers and having to tell their stories, and things get lost in the system. So in terms of delivering good practice, having a high turnover of social workers is not positive.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you.
Thanks. Gail, did you want to come in with a response too?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to let you know, Stephen, that we regularly recruit or over-recruit newly qualified social workers to the tune of 40 per year. So in September 2020, we recruited 39, including some overseas social workers. And currently, in the next 2 weeks, we will be starting our round of interviews for our 10th cohort of newly qualified social workers, and we are aiming again to recruit rising up to 40. We're just trying to finalise our numbers at the moment. So that is a very buoyant area of practice. The Social Work Academy, as Claire has said, are very engaged in supporting the learning and development, as are all of the relevant staff within the established social work teams, because of course they are the ones that are supervising these new recruits into their first year in employment. So we do very well locally in Gloucestershire, but we need to, because this is part of our strategy for stabilising our workforce. There is a national problem. There aren't lots and lots of qualified, experienced social workers hanging around waiting to work, and they're all snapped up. So it's a really hard market to recruit within. So the best thing is to attempt to do that, but also to keep feeding into the system through this pipeline. And that is something that I would say is well tested and has been successful and will continue to be. We don't have any current plans to divert our attention away from that strategy.
But retention is really important, isn't it?
Oh, retention is a whole other ball game. Recruitment is one issue, retention is another.
Yes, and retention is another.
It certainly is. And trying to avoid the churn within the system is not only important for the organisation, it's critically important for children and young people and families.
Yes.
Because one of the things that we know is that children, young people and families are adversely impacted when they have changes in their social worker. That's very disruptive. So we do try to avoid that, but it is one of our key performance indicators that we keep a really close eye on. We have just recently completed our social work annual health check, both an online survey and 17 focused groups. And one of the things that I was instrumental in adding in for this year was some very particular questions and focus regarding recruitment and retention. And that was specifically to obtain from our current workforce key feedback around the push-pull factors that go to the heart of why people come to work in Gloucestershire, how we can retain them working in Gloucestershire, but also to consider what the reasons might be as to why they leave. Because if we can understand that and address that, then that will really, really assist us both on the recruitment and the retention.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Gail. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's really important to restate, and it's something I think we've looked at previously. Can I move on from Stephen Hurst to Stephen Davis, please?
Thank you, Chair. I had a specific question on page 40. There's this reference to a dip sample looking at 19 children's record, identified that recording was largely colourblind, and then goes on to talk about, as a result, we've developed a training programme. I was intrigued. Is colour blindness, when looking at this, a good thing or a bad thing?
Chair, can I answer that? Because I'm probably closest to the detail of it, if that's okay. Yeah, so we are required as social workers to assess the individual needs, risks and circumstances of all children and young people who come to our attention. If we are assessing and attempting to provide support to children and young people that have protected characteristics, that could be around ethnicity, language, culture, religion, etc., that we are not taking into account, then it is likely that we will be unable to appropriately meet their needs, risks and circumstances. So it is hugely important. Failure to do so would mean that we would not be providing a personal service. And what we also know is, and there's lots of research on this, is that we must be careful about unconscious bias to ensure that we don't make decisions based on things that we think are right. Because we do have some disproportionate numbers within our care population, for example. This has been well researched for years and years within the sector. We need to look towards the ethnicity breakdown within our whole population within Gloucestershire, and we ought to be able to mirror that. We ought certainly not to have more numbers of Black and ethnic minority children within our children in care population than we do, say, for example, within our general population within Gloucestershire. So it is very important that we take these matters into account, and all of the individual social workers and managers across the whole of children's services are expected to be alert and skilled at assessing, understanding and responding to those issues. It is a requirement in respect of a social worker's regulated profession. You know, we are registered with the Social Work England, and there are expectations on us as a profession to be able to do that in an appropriate manner. So we have introduced, as you rightly pointed out in that section of the report, a number of approaches through the Social Work Academy and otherwise. The principal social worker has obviously been very involved in addressing this as well with individual teams and service areas. And it is something that I'm also in conversation with the Black Workers Network within the council, because we also have Black and minority ethnic staff working within our workforce, and we need to absolutely make sure that they are treated appropriately and fairly and with respect. And where we don't achieve that, then obviously we need to deal with it. So, you know, those are some corporate responsibilities as well as employers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Did you want to come in on something on that? Add further to the roost?
Yeah, just very, very quickly because of time. I thought a practical example might help to that question. So if you're a social worker assessing a family where you suspect something as hideous as FGM might be a possibility for a young girl. So certain parts of Somalia, Egypt, northern Nigeria, who emanate from those areas of the world still do practice FGM. So, and there are 6,000 young women every year in this country who are mutilated in this country, let alone those that are sent abroad. So there's a good example of why you just can't afford to be colour or culture blind. You have to associate those risks with certain cohorts of children that are a reality and take those into consideration. So, you know, that's a key reason why we just can't afford to be colour or culture blind, because there are certain risks that come with certain cohorts.
Right, thank you, Chris. I mean, perhaps that's another topic we might be able to pick up in the new council, but I'd like to move on now to Barley.
Hi, yeah, this was a question for Claire, really. It was regarding the neglect toolkit, and I was just wondering if there's any ways that you think we could promote or implement the use of the neglect toolkit. Just because obviously the statistics on it was 0.5% from health and 33% from education. Yeah.
Hi, Barley. Good morning. Yeah, I mean, I think in many ways you've had the sign off for using that toolkit. So now it's about how that gets embedded, and that has to be about clear messages through the safeguarding partnership that, you know, you've agreed to this, but actually this is the data and this is the evidence of what we're seeing. And I think that needs to be a challenge really into the partnership, by the partnership, across the partnership. And alongside that, it's changing that culture, you know. So that example that Chris gave where you know, where a health worker said they didn't have time to do it. Well, actually, they have to have time to do it because it's part of their job and it needs to be integrated into their roles. You know, it's how people actually integrate a toolkit, which will actually make their job easier in the long run, because it'll give them some confidence around their assessment and some clear evidence around their assessment. So Barley, I think it is about training and revisiting it again as an issue, perhaps through the safeguarding board, and just raising that awareness, and then just keeping a really clear focus on what that performance is, and just keeping that reporting going. Some of the case audits that Rob and the service are doing, Rob England, will highlight potentially where those assessments haven't been done and children have ended up into the system. So it's about telling a really clear story around how it is being used, and if it isn't being used, having a very clear plan through the partnership around training and engagement. I think the ambassadors could potentially have a role in that, Barley, in the sense that in other areas. I know young people have been very involved in the neglect strategy, and you know, just emphasising how important it is really for children and young people.
Ask a question, you can get a job, Barley.
Thank you, Claire. That was really useful.
You're welcome, Barley.
Great. No, thank you for that question, Barley. We always love hearing questions from the ambassadors, because it's just a slightly different perspective, and it can help us see things clearer sometimes. Can I come on to Richard, please? Richard Bos.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I won't be long. Two things. The issue of the IT problems that Chris has highlighted with me over the last couple of months have all been passed up. I can just assure you of that. The issues that Chris raised again with me this morning, I raised straight away with the leader and cabinet member responsible, and I've had assurances that everything that's being done, you know, everything that can be done is being done. So just to, you know, to let you know that. But also going back to social workers retention, analysis is also done of all the exit interviews for why people actually leave Gloucestershire, and understanding why they leave is really important. And there's nothing indicated at the moment in any of the exit interviews that Chris has briefed me on that state that they're leaving for anything but different reasons around family and stuff. There's nothing about the service being bad or anything like that, and not wanting to work here. And all of them are saying that they would come back and consider working here in the future. But right now, at this COVID time, they want to be near a family and that sort of thing. That's all I wanted to say. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Richard. Yes, and I'm not sure if you hear earlier when it was suggested that possibly ICT might need to be one of the things that we look at when we get the new contract.
Yeah, I heard Chris say that he would recommend we wait and see. The new contract's up. It's going to be in place really soon, and it'll be a different ball game. SOC Wisteria have not been supporting us, and we're in dispute with them, and it's been a big problem for us once they, I think, understood that the tender wasn't going to go their way.
Okay, no, I understand. Thank you for updating on us on that. Lastly, I've got Phil, and then I'd like to draw it to a close, and we may consider whether or not we'd like a short comfort break. Phil.
Yeah, just a quick one, following on from what Chris said earlier on about partners and particularly health. Something that's frequently run past me is the waiting times for young people to even get considered around their mental health. In Chris's opinion, not wanting to drive a wedge between him and partners, is that service adequate given COVID and the demand, or is it something we really need to flag up through our own Health in Overview Scrutiny Committee, particularly now it'll be the new one, obviously after the elections, but obviously there are some blockages there and waiting times are quite extensive. Do you have a view?
I suppose that was directed to Claire, but I'm not sure, Claire, if you're one that's best placed to respond.
Nationally, I think there is an issue around access to CAM services. So, you know, Gloucestershire wouldn't be very different in that respect. I think particularly for those children and young people with acute mental health needs, accessing the right services at the right time is a challenge. I do know you have had some problems in Gloucestershire, but I'm not best placed to give you the detail of that. Apart from saying that I do know and I understand from Gail that there is some work going forward. But young people will tell us consistently, and I know Barley and her colleagues, the ambassadors, when I spoke with them, that was one of the issues they raised. And at the last improvement board, they very helpfully gave an offer to work with health services, particularly around the mental health services in Gloucestershire, to do possibly an ambassador's sort of inspection type self-assessment of how those services were going. So I think that will provide some very rich information, and I understand that's going ahead and that is being planned. But Gail, you might have more detailed information on that.
Yes. Thank you, Claire. Would you like me to respond Chair?
Yes, but I also want to bring Andrea in too. On I think I assume on the which goes to which committee issue. Andrea, could you just?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I actually wanted to say, and it might actually help Gail, is that this issue came up at Health Scrutiny on Tuesday as well, where Stephen Hurst was chairing. And I let the committee know that it is on the member development programme to repeat the exercise that we did late last year with health professionals, looking at aspects of children and young people's mental health, particularly obviously the response during COVID and what we've learned and how obviously when we kind of come out the other side of it, the implications of that. And actually that was a really useful, and that actually we did jointly with Adult Social Care Committee, Health Scrutiny and this committee, because obviously it cuts across everything. And what was really good about that is that the ambassadors were able to make really good connections with NHS colleagues, and they have been taking that forward. So we will be doing an exercise early in, well, officers' calendars are obviously a nightmare. So as soon as we possibly can in the new council, we will be doing that work.
Thank you, Andrea. Have I got anybody else wanting to speak? Gail, did you want to follow up on that?
Yeah. Yes, please. So operationally, I am frequently contacted regarding individual children and young people where professionals are concerned that their emotional, psychological and mental health needs are not being adequately addressed. And Councillor Phil Avery obviously has just referred to that. The ambassadors prepared and presented an excellent video to the Improvement Board regarding their views, wishes and feelings regarding the issue of emotional, psychological, mental health well-being. And as was just been mentioned, have offered to undertake a young ambassador inspection. This would, of course, need to cover both the child and adolescent mental health service as well as the adult mental health service for young adults, because obviously our care experienced young people will be over 18, between 18 and 25. So I think this is one of those critical issues that covers both the under 18s and the over 18s, which really straddles very well, I think, the children's and adults services. There has been a concern, which the ambassadors have highlighted, that the pandemic has disrupted a number of young people's therapeutic recoveries. We know that there have been concerns that some critical mental health provision has not continued to be provided on a face-to-face basis for the young people with the most complex needs, and that is hugely regrettable. It's something that I personally have had to address for some young people. I do have a monthly liaison meeting with Mel Harrison, who is the senior manager, and Sarah Birmingham, the senior managers from the trust that are responsible for child and adolescent mental health services. But I know that there have been some very significant concerns. We are undertaking a joint safeguarding adult board and children's safeguarding partnership joint review regarding one young person who made a very, very serious attempt on their life. So these are very real, very serious and very complex issues. But I would like to reassure colleagues that we do have a very active dialogue in this space. And as Andrea was just referring to, we've got the health committee, we've got improvement board, and we obviously today have overview and scrutiny as well. So this is on everybody's agenda, and I think quite rightly so. But it will be important that we coordinate and streamline our efforts so that it remains a clear plan moving forward, where we are moving together. Otherwise, I fear that it could become unhelpful, if not coordinated or streamlined properly.
Phil?
Thank you very much. Clarity all round. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, members. We've done 2 substantive items, and it's 10 just gone 10 to 12. Is there a general consensus that people would like a coffee break, or should we plough on? We have 5 more substantive items to cover, and I don't
get back to work.
Get back to work.
Yes.
Anybody else? No, right? Okay. Well, we'll carry straight on if that's.
Crack on.
Sorry.
Let's crack on.
Let's crack on. Excellent. Good. So, agenda item number 6, sufficiency strategy. Chris, it's over to you.
Sorry, Chair, I'm Chris. Do you want me to start on the sufficiency strategy?
Yeah, I just want to do a quick intro, Wendy, if I may, because I mentioned this sufficiency strategy as part of the response to the question about priorities for the next scrutiny committee. And I mentioned that the market will play an important part in the delivery of good quality placements for children, and that it was underdeveloped in Gloucestershire. And this strategy is our key approach to intervening in the market and developing more and higher quality placements. And actually, it's really exciting. Some of the stuff that we're doing in this area, I think, is really innovative, very creative. And I know 1 or 2 of you have been to Travone House, to see Travone House. That's the first, if you like, project of many that I hope is within that strategy that we've been able to deliver. So I just wanted to say that it's the kind of paper that makes me wish I'd have done this job 10 years ago, because we'd be in a very different place now in terms of the market. But I didn't, and we are where we are. But this is a very exciting development, I think, for Gloucestershire in the longer term. So over to Wendy.
Thanks, Chris.
Wendy.
Thanks, Chair. Right, so I'll do some highlights and then go on to some more of the details. I think that'll be helpful. So in general, for the sufficiency for placements, there's been an increase this year, which we can see. So in April 2020, we had around 360 placements. And of today, we've got over 400 placements. So we've been managing an increase in placements throughout the year. Now, some of this is just general increase of the children in care, but there is also a challenge that's been put forward around COVID. So some of that is around young people not being able to move on to placements, and particularly post-18, moving into accommodation and supporting people services. And that's also driven where the COVID initiative of, homeless people being offered accommodation and housing. So there is a bit of a backlog, but we've been managing that this year within the service. The other bit of the area is around the market for the South West. It's not the strongest market in the world, and we are doing lots of work with our colleagues in the South West around mapping capacity and resource. But what we do need to do is also be really innovative for ourselves and quite astute in how we go out to the market and how we look to meet our needs for our children and young people as we go forward. So COVID has had an impact, and it's got an increase of children still within placements within children's services. We still have a high level of same-day referrals, so it comes in around 27% at this moment in time. And they're not children we don't know about in the placement service. They're children that we haven't planned for, so need to be moved that day due to poor planning. And as Chris says, generally, the more placement moves you do, the higher the cost goes. But it's not just about the cost. It's also then about the trauma for the children and young people that we're placing. So some young people do experience very short-term placements when they come into care,
due to the fact that possibly we haven't done the planning. Now, there's lots of work been done on that. So Gail and Philip have done a huge piece of work around looking at permanence of children in care. So if we know it is their lifetime home, we're looking at their placements differently and we're securing those placements for them. But we've also set up, Gail and Philip have set up an entry to care panel. So this is around having more information about how we're planning to bring children into care and if it's the right thing for them to do. And it does give placements much more time to work in partnership with our colleagues in practice when that is the right thing for our children and young people, and they can come in a planned way. So that's early days. We had a good panel yesterday. And we are looking at these children differently. And it's a very different way then to go out to the market to seek a placement rather than buying any bed. We're desperately trying to purchase the right bed for the children and young people. We've also done lots of work this year around stabilising our complex young people. So we had a handful of young people, and you'll see some of them that we've put in the back of the panel of the paperwork, that have had real extensive placement moves, real instability even in a very short period in what they've been into care. So we've worked really hard with Gail and practice to hold children and to find the right placements. So what we've found over this year as well is that we haven't had so many complex children needing to be moved in crisis, and we're working really hard to work together so that we hold young people and do planned moves. One young person has had a huge amount of placement moves, over 25. And when we tried to do a planned move, she said, "Oh, I've never met anybody before when I'm going to move to placement. I just turn up." So that's a huge difference in her life. So those are some of the things that we've been working on. Also, we've developed Tyrone House, which obviously offers accommodation for some of our care leaving young people. At the moment, we have 9 young people in placement. We have another 4 young people planned to move in, because it's all about planned moves. We do have an emergency bed here, and we've had 3 young people access the emergency bed, and that gives them stability and placement planning. The areas that really have made some difference in Tyrone House is the young people that come here aren't our quick win young people. Some of these young people are very complex. They've been known to services for their lifetime. They are overwhelmed by the offer that they get offered at Tyrone House, not only the accommodation, but the support. So when you talk to the young people, they feel that the staff here really care about them, and that makes a huge difference to them. They stay in placement, their missing episodes are reduced, and it shows us as well some of the vulnerabilities that our young people are experiencing in other semi-independent accommodation, where we don't have that 24/7 support for them. So at the moment, if you look at that, I think we've got around 72 young people in semi-independent accommodation. So when you look at the numbers, leaving care will be some of our biggest projected figures going forward, because we've got that increase of children in care. They're going to go through the system. So it's looking about how do we manage that for placement sufficiency. The other bit around Tyrone is, and how we're looking to be more innovative in our commissioning, is that we commission for stability. So Tyrone House, you can stay at Tyrone or involved with Tyrone House till you're 25. So where we've talked before about social workers maybe moving on and children having disruption, we're trying to mirror and reduce that as well in placements for children and young people. So if you can be with the same provider and your same care staff team for 9 years really with Tyrone House, that's a huge difference when you look at some of our young people might have moved placement every 4 weeks. So that has a vast impact on them. The other bit for Tyrone, and just picking up on their health visits, the mental health, is that there are mental health nurses on site 24/7. Now, the difference that that's made to young people, and particularly highlighted because of the pandemic. So that means some of our most complex young people have had face-to-face
therapeutic mental health support, which they would not have received if they had been in other placements. So it's very beneficial. It's brought a therapeutic approach to the care of young people, even though, and we do work with Dr. Anna Draper around the trauma-informed model of care, but whenever we're reviewing a young person, wherever they're experiencing things, they've always got that overview from the nurse being involved with them. We've had some instances where young people have been really distressed, and having the nurse as part of the team has been able to manage them and keep them safe and within the setting. I'm in Travone myself today, actually. I come here once a week. Young people want to stay here. They are in the building. They talk about being here. They call it home. And many of them haven't had that experience for a long time. I was chatting to the staff yesterday, and actually a couple of the young people here, there's a lot of work done here around sleep and young people getting good sleep, which is really important. And staff were saying actually that some of the young people just like them to read to them in the evening. Oh, Leslie, did you want to speak? Sorry.
To interrupt, Wendy, I was going to let you finish. We're when you've done.
Oh, right. Okay. Sorry.
Thanks.
I think Travone is a fantastic offer, but with the best intentions, it does create a bit of a two-tiered service now for some of our care leaving young people. So we need to consider about how we move it forward. So the aspirations of the sufficiency strategy actually are really quite high. We do need to do things really differently. We need to create a property portfolio for Gloucestershire, for all children, not just our care leavers. And in doing that, we've listed and we've worked in different ways of how we're going to go out to the market and develop things. So we've talked about Travone. We are holding really complex young people here, and the feedback from the young people is really positive. There is consideration for Travone too, but that really needs to be considered at pace. It will take us at least 2 years to build another Travone. To really meet the numbers and capacity that we want for our young people, we also need to identify Travone 3. The other bit that comes on top of that is that the government announced last week, I think, that from September we cannot place under 16s in any unregulated provision. And the other part that they've said is that they're going to bring in formal registration for 16 plus accommodation. Now that's currently not in place for 16 plus provision. It will come in very soon. Travone House is a model that's registerable. We will be able to register this building. We will really struggle to register all the other very small houses that offer accommodation for our young people. So it's not only about it's the best offer, the legislation is going to change and going to change quite quickly for leaving care accommodation. Where you look at our sufficiency strategy for children in residential care, we do want to go forward and block purchase and build capacity in county. At this moment in time, we've got 74 young people in residential care, of which only 12 actually live in Gloucestershire. So all the other young people were placed out of county. So it's a huge number of children that have lost all their community connectedness to their schools, to their families, but also as well for us in resources, in our staff being able to go out and manage and visit and see our children and young people. They're in homes across the country. So over this year, we want to go out to the market and develop provision in county in partnership with providers. We do have one property to put forward, which will be Barnwood, and Barnwood will also hold urgent provision, emergency provision for children, which is very critical now, given that from September we cannot put any children under 16 in unregistered provision. So that's a critical piece of work we need to get forward. We need to build capacity in county in children's homes for our young people. One is to stop our children and young people moving out of county, but also for those children that are placed out of county to give them the opportunity to come home to Gloucester, to come back to their families, and to be able to be supported locally. We have to be creative around that, and things we will need to build into those is step down to fostering in those placements, but also stay in close arrangements. So where our young people are older in residential provision, they can still come back to county, come into provision that's suitable for them, but know that they've got a good transition to stay in close provision with the same providers that they'll come back to county with. So we give them continuity of care. Another area of development is to develop Townsend in the Forest, which is to develop a parent and child residential assessment centre. We currently at any one time have at least 6, if not more, parent and child residential assessments going on. We don't have any local provision in county. We send all of our families out all across the country, which means they completely lose community connectedness. And the other bit for them is if it is in county, they can make those networks and stay local. So if their parenting is viable, they have the best chance possible, where at the moment they have a very disparate chance because they're hundreds of miles sometimes from the county. We'll also join this up and create a nursery and children's centre. So we'll put some excellence in early years within that setting, so that families automatically get used to the children's centre offer or using the nursery for their children. So we're giving that really good start and good parenting. The other areas working in partnership is to create provision for some of our more complex and specialist children with disabilities. And again, that's another critical area. We have a high number of children that are placed in specialist placements out of county. So there's a number of things we're doing there. Some is we're building bespoke provision for young people. We're building bespoke provision for some really complex young people, and that's to build them a lifetime home. So they're very complex, they're quite young, but working with the market, that there isn't provision out there, but rather what we're going to do is make the provision for them in county. So with that, we're working with the Department of Health and our colleagues in health and social care to build the provision for them. We're also working with NHS England to develop Shipton Olive. So we've just got approval for funding. We've got £300,000 of funding for Shipton Olive, which will create 2 specialist provisions in county. One will offer respite for families that use our positive behaviour SIB, and that is all about keeping complex young people in county. So we're going to offer those families some specialist respite, which will really support the programme. And the other flat will also offer complex young people provision and also emergency provision, so that our young people are kept safe if that's what we need to do. The other pressure that we've really got is around our care leavers moving on into accommodation. Now, COVID has sort of exacerbated that. Where our young people move on into semi-independent accommodation is managed around housing benefit. So the aspiration for our young people to get employment is actually incredibly low. And one example of that is one of our young people, care experience young people, got a job at Travone House, but actually lived in semi-independent accommodation. Now, when they went back to celebrate, the accommodation said, oh, you shouldn't have got a job because actually you've made yourself homeless because you'll have to pay rent now for the accommodation that you're in. And that rent was around £900 a month, which is really huge amounts of money for quite poor accommodation. So what we want to do is really change the market in that for our young people. So we've worked with Broomfields, which is a housing association, and we've been offered some accommodation in county. So we're looking to pilot a programme that will offer care leavers accommodation, but it will also offer them training or employment or apprenticeship. So as part of being part of the accommodation, they've also got the aspiration to go on and gain employment or do an apprenticeship or do some college and training. And this is very different than if they live in supporting people accommodation. Many of our young people don't do apprenticeships because, again, they can't afford that if they're getting monies for an apprenticeship to live in semi-independent accommodation, so supported living accommodation. So we want to pilot a project. And one of the things that we really do need to do over the next year or so is review the impact of supporting people accommodation on the aspirations for young people, because if you really haven't got a gateway to employment, and when we did the first sufficiency strategy and we worked with young people, they told us that when they were in semi-independent supported living accommodation, they said they were on hold, their life was on hold because they couldn't get employment, or they couldn't earn enough that would get them out of that accommodation to get their own accommodation. So we do have to be more innovative. I think that's the most of the key bits on the project. We did give some examples in the paper as well about how young people have experienced things, and we've put in some of their roadmap journeys. This is just a tool that we really use in commissioning that really shows to us some of the key points and challenges in some of our children and young people's lives, and it's things that we want to work to prevent going forward and improve for our young people, so that roadmaps don't keep continuing in the same way. I don't know if you've got any questions. Sorry.
Thanks. Yes, Leslie's raised her hand, but I'd like to say, just before we go on to questions, I can say thanks very much for showing me around Trevone House. I was back in November or December, I think it was. I was stunned by how great the facility was. I really was, and I did meet someone I thought I'd recognise who'd been through our care system. I hope that wasn't the individual you were referring to in the accommodation. Anyway, we need to go on to questions. I have a question, but I'd like to bring Leslie in before I ask that. Leslie.
Thank you. Well, I haven't got a question, but I would just like to say thank you very much to Wendy and to other people who have been behind the creation of Trevone House. It does seem quite a number of years ago when we had a one-day working group looking at what was done in Gloucestershire to look after young people who are in danger of going into Tier 4 and possibly being sectioned, because there is nowhere in the county to hospitalise young people who need to have a section order. They are shipped out of the county, sometimes as far away as Scotland. And so the fact that we now have Trevone House, which can hold young people who need so much love and support to prevent them becoming more and more unwell, is just fantastic. And I tingle saying this because it is just so important. I mean, the young people who have been let down all their lives, the least we can do for them is to recognise that they need everything possible to support them and to rehabilitate them so that they can take their rightful place in society. And words fail me. It is really so important that we do this, and it's recognised that it's needed. Trevone House is, if you haven't been there, it's just fantastic, and the atmosphere and the warmth of the place is amazing, and the lengths that have been gone to make sure that it's going to do the job required is there. You know, nothing's been stinted, and thank you for doing it. It is a true recognition of the fact that it's the least we can do, as I say, for young people who have, I think, been let down by society. And it's no fault of the parents at all. Parents do their best, whatever. But we need, as an organisation, and similar authorities need to recognise that there is a need for places like Trevone, and I'm delighted that more is going to follow. I'm also pleased to hear that at last it's been recognised that young people should not go into unregulated accommodation. You know, that's something which should have been dealt with a long time ago. It is scandalous that young people who need to be looked after should go somewhere where they're not cared for at enormous expense. It is a scandal. And so if this is one thing current government does, it, which I can approve of, this will be it, because it really is so needed. But I thank you for Wendy for all you do. I know you care, and I know you will do all you can to just to make sure that those young people that need absolutely gold-plated services from, or gold standard from GCC, to make sure that they can take their place in society and lead fulfilling lives. It's fantastic. So thank you. And I have made the offer of I'll go and cook with young people in Travone House. I would love to do it. So please take me up on it. Thank you.
That's a brilliant offer, Leslie. There is a quite extensive cooking facility, of course, there at Travone House. So you should have fun. Perhaps Lynn or Wendy could take that with Leslie afterwards. I'm rubbish at cooking, so I'm not going to make the same offer. But I've got Chris. Did you want to come in and respond further?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to add to what Wendy said, and I think you'll sense that the projects she's outlined are very exciting. But the opening, I'm sorry if this has been said, but I'm at that age where I do have to take a break every 2 hours. So if she said this while I took my comfort break, forgive me. But there is the opening premiere next week, and we've got the National Director of Ofsted involved in the opening of the facility, because it's in keeping with what Ofsted are saying we should be doing for these young people. And also the outgoing commissioner, Children's Commissioner for England, and Longfield, who's also involved in that premiere. And that's going to be shown next week virtually, of course, but you get a virtual tour and you will hear both of those people speaking about how innovative and creative this is, and how we need much more of it. And Wendy said we've got 72 young people in semi-independent accommodation. At the moment, we've got 9 in Travone House, and we do need other facilities like this. Of course, the other thing, once you get it right, it does shine a light on the bits where we've got young people living which aren't as good and should be better. So, I think if I would ask anything of you at all as a committee, is to lend your weight to the development and delivery of this strategy as soon as possible. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think that was helpful. I've got Colin and then I've got Lorraine, and I've got a thumbs up from Richard. So I don't want to take any more questions after that. Though I might invite Richard in to summarise some of the future plans. But over to Colin.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to run it, but I do want to sort of echo what refer to what Chris said, is that he wishes he'd done it 10 years ago. Up. The signs worked. So I'm not quite sure where I got.
Colin, I didn't get any of that.
Myself. I just the signs that we need all facilities locally. I've turned my video off. Is that better for people?
Yeah, it is a bit better.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. I'll go back to the beginning. I want to say how pleased I am that Travone is up and running, and it's brilliant that it's there. Chris says he wishes he'd done it 10 years ago, and frankly, the signs here in Gloucestershire that we needed something like this, and the call for this, were made some time ago. And whilst I'm so pleased that this is up and running, I'm so disappointed that we didn't do it some time ago. All the signs were there. It was being called for. And it's as a result of us trying to not have direct provision and commissioning and buying in services. And we've seen how badly that's served us. And we do need to be developing our own. And we see this now in this sufficiency strategy. So it's brilliant, but it's fairly damning of what went on in the past, that we, despite it being called for, did nothing about it until quite recently.
Sorry, thanks, Colin. Can I bring Richard in to respond to that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I'd just like to say that 2017 was my mark in the sand as far as taking on children's services. I read a lot of reports about what had gone on before, and with Chris Spencer and with the other officers around at that time and subsequently, we have drawn up what now is going forward as the offer for Gloucestershire. It's been recognised by Ofsted as an outstanding exemplar as the way all councils should go. There isn't any other offering like this in the UK, so no one's done it before. We've done it now. It is proving its worth. It's taken commitment. It's taken real innovation from officers like Wendy Williams and some of her predecessors, but it's also taken the leadership of Chris Spencer around the academy and around all the other things that have shaped what we needed, because he saw when he came in where the gaps were, and we started having to invest in putting the money into the places where it was necessary to build the foundations of children's services going forward. It's taken longer than we wanted, but from 2017, I would hope you would say that you've seen a sea change in the way children's services have been managed by this county. And going forward, we will benefit from that as a county, and the young people of this county will get what they deserve, which is proper children's services, properly financed, properly funded, properly supported across all of the offerings, whether it's the NHS, CCG, all of the other partners to provide children's services. We've tied that together, and going forward now, I think that you are seeing a real difference. And what's gone on before 2017, I can't comment on because I wasn't around then, but I would hope you would accept that what you've seen since then has been a sea change. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. I think that's a really helpful intervention here. I think it may have taken a while for some of these things to be developed, but the products are fantastic. I've got no end of praise for you and Chris and Wendy in particular for Trevone House. It is an absolutely outstanding facility. So yeah, absolutely, Richard. There's no possible criticism. I've got nothing but praise for the actions that you've taken since 2017, since you were in post. Can I come on to Lorraine now? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't turn my video on because there are problems. I'd just like to say that this report has answered some of the questions that I had in relation to Trevone House regarding it just being Trevone House and the amount of people that would require access to it. I'm very pleased to see that there are further Trevone houses planned, and not just in this format, but also accommodation for care leavers with children. And I think this is vitally important because their children are going to go on and benefit from this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Did anyone want to respond, or should we move on? No. Okay. So we've done the sufficiency strategy. I really like to thank the officers, Chris and Wendy, for the work, enormous work that's been done on this. But it's now, I think, time to move on to the quality assurance framework, and it's over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just do a quick sound check to see that I'm coming through? Yeah, loud and clear. Thank you, Richard.
You're coming through fine.
Thank you. Much of what the report covers from a headline perspective, I think, has already been discussed, and so I won't labour any of those points particularly, but happy to come back and discuss them as needed. But just to re-emphasise for the record and anybody listening in, that there certainly is a positive trajectory of improving practice that can be evidenced over the last certainly 24 months, with considerable reductions in inadequate practice and improvements in quality of good practice. Additionally, we previously saw quite high rates of children at risk of imminent harm, that now is an infrequent occurrence, which is further evidence of improvement. And as I mentioned previously, a wider pool of weaker practice within the department that in the last 2 months is also showing evidence of shrinking. So more and more of the work is moving into a firmer, more secure footing, getting closer to or exceeding good. So again, a positive picture for the authority, though as mentioned previously, I think this is not yet secure. We would ideally like to see 3 to 5, possibly 6 months of this kind of level of quality of practice to feel more secure that we've moved well beyond that zone of inadequacy. And then to be able to set further stretch targets. We've heard Chris mention earlier on that ideally we'd like our inadequate practice down in the single figures. And I'm sure we would like most of our work to be in the good. But those stretch targets, I think, can come once our current practice is more secure. In terms of that pool of weaker practice, what we've done through our recent behind-the-scenes QA work, as it were, is we've identified 18 teams. And you heard Gail mention previously that we've had a team improvement plan running. There were 14 teams within that team improvement plan, and there are indications that a number of those teams have progressed, as was hoped. What we can now do is look at that next layer of practice. Now that we're looking beyond inadequate into weak requires improvement, and we've identified a further 18 teams that Gail, myself, and others are meeting shortly to discuss how we might then, I suppose, graduate the team improvement plan to now incorporate those teams. And we will again discuss those teams in the strategic performance meeting, which will be next week, Monday. So again, very optimistic and signs of good leadership, grip and drive to progress the quality of practice for children. In terms of areas of strength and vulnerability, in terms of children's legal status, I think our children in care consistently seem to be in receipt of a better service. We're under no illusions that there are improvements needed. You've heard about the work from Wendy around placement sufficiency. Gail mentioned the work on permanence that Philip Zigarula has been leading on. So there are undoubted areas for improvement for our children in care, but it is the consistently better performing area of our practice. Where we do need to attend to, and there are improvement plans in place, are the work for care leavers, children in need, and child protection. Now, child protection is not grossly out of kilter in terms of the levels of inadequate practice, but because those children by definition are at risk of significant harm, we really need to be on our game for those children, and I think that's where the improvements are needed for child protection. In terms of impact from audit, and this touched on an earlier question from Colin, we do see impact from audit. Undoubtedly, we see impact from audit, but it is an area where we need to continue to put emphasis and attention so that any actions identified through audits where we can improve services for children are undertaken in a timely fashion. A couple of other areas where we need to see improvement is around the quality of planning. That's not yet consistently good. And because the plan is the delivery vehicle for how we make improvements in the life of children, that is a fairly significant one. Also, we need to do some work around the consistency of supervision for our managers, so that there is a consistent view of supervision expectations in the service. And lastly, but very quickly, that there's work to be done to really drive up the inclusion of children, young people and families in the audits undertaken of the service to them. We've got very good participation in our auditing from social workers, team managers, independent reviewing officers and child protection chairs, but not as much with the children and families themselves. And so recently, our leadership have mandated that an audit won't be deemed completed until it has that inclusion of the child and the family in the audit, notwithstanding there may be exceptional circumstances where that's not appropriate. For example, we wouldn't expect to hear directly from a 2-year-old child. So there will be examples when that's not suitable, but wherever possible, we would expect that to be a mandated requirement of the audit. I recognize that time is short, so I'll probably draw a line under the headline reporting there, but more than happy to field queries and comments. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I I have a question from Stephen Davis, and that is the only hand as things stand. Stephen.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. First off, I've always been a critic of the progress we've been making in this process, and I'm really pleased to see that we're finally turning a corner here. And like Rob, I hope that we can hold that gain and build on it. I had, as ever, a very specific question. On page 102, we cover the issue of overdue actions from previous audits, and the figures are alarming to the point where I wrote down, will some of these ever get done, because they date back quite a long way in terms of those actions. So I just wondered if we can step up what we're doing about following up actions that are overdue, or sort of reset the level here, because some of those outstanding audits date back to January last year.
If I may respond to that, Chair. Okay, I'll plough ahead. I had Andrea's nod, and if Andrea's nodded, then I'm allowed to. The response to that is, Stephen, you're right to identify that as a vulnerability for us. It is a vulnerability that Ofsted themselves have identified on a number of occasions, and are challenging us to say, well, how do you make sure that you do indeed gain the benefit from the audit for these individual children? As I mentioned in my rattle through, I think we can undoubtedly see the benefit of audits on a number of levels, but that one in particular is one where we're vulnerable. So it is one that we revisit monthly at the strategic performance meeting. We will be discussing it again on Monday, and I've got little doubt that we will need to be putting some bite into that to see more timely responses from audit.
Thank you, Rob. I think I have no other questions, and since we're running a bit behind time, if there are no other questions, I'd like to say thank you, Rob, for presenting your report and for having done so for the last several years. And thank you very much. Can we move on to performance monitoring? And it's back to Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and in the light of being pressed for time, I mean, this is a standard report. You get it every month, and so you'll be very familiar with it. And in particular, I would draw your attention to the overview on page 103, 104, and the subsequent scorecard. Just to, by way of introduction, pull out a few points. The first thing I would say is what I always say, and I make no apology for, because it's true, and that is many of these PIs are stretch targets, and we do compare ourselves against good and outstanding authorities that we aspire to be, rather than sort of middle of the pack PIs, and we do stretch them regularly. I'm a bit of a cynic about scorecards where you see whole swathes of green, because that to me means that you either haven't set a target which is sufficiently stretching, or they were too easy to achieve in the first place. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing I'd say is that there is a statement in there that during the last period, we've only had 1/3 of those PIs improve and 2/3 have deteriorated. Well, the first thing I'd say again about that is that of those 2/3, many of those are still within range of target or acceptability, an acceptable range of target. It doesn't mean to say that we're failing in those particular areas. The other thing I would say about the performance data set generally is that Andy Dempsey and the corporate performance team are constantly evolving this report so that we're able to report on a wider suite of performance and elements of performance, so that we're better able to monitor our progress and intervene where necessary. Having said all that, which sounds like probably a number of excuses in some ways. Having said all that, the performance of the service does look as though it's dipped a little in the last month or so. And I would say that it's inextricably linked in some respects to the problem we rehearsed earlier around IT. Some of the timeliness of what we're doing has suffered in terms of decision making, has suffered because of the practical problems we've had with IT issues. And I also think that the resilience of our workforce after what is, on and off a year in lockdown is beginning to possibly play a role in that as well. I think, personally, I speak from my own experience. I'm totally fed up with being in lockdown. It's a pretty miserable existence. You're never away from work if you're working from home. The laptop pings at 8 o'clock in the evening, and if you've been up since 7:30 in the morning working, you still have a tendency to look at it because it pings. So I think the resilience of our workforce is something that we need to take seriously and underpins, along with IT issues, what I would call a modest dip in performance. But I hope those comments by way of introduction do contextualise that, in particularly the benchmark that we use against good and outstanding authorities. The fact that 2/3, while deteriorating, is still within target. And as I say, as a tool, it's getting better all the time. And you will see in recent times, and certainly going forward, the report on the performance of areas like the fostering service will also be incorporated into that performance data set. So I'll stop there, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chris, and also thank you for the explanations of the potential slight dip in performance, which slightly concerned me when I read them, I guess. But what I can say is I thought your overview of the report was very good. I thought it was kind of quite clear in terms of the so what. I've got two people wanting to speak. First of all, I've got Richard Castle, and then I've got Leslie Williams. If there is anybody else who wants to speak, do let me know now, because we are not far off 1 o'clock, and I would like to finish as soon after 1 o'clock as we can. So straight over to Richard.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chris, as ever, for your comprehensive report. I have to say, personally, it's a delight to have seen the positive trajectory there's been over the last 4 years or so, and I do congratulate everybody involved. I've got one observation, if I may, one slight history lesson, and then a question, Chris, for you at the end of it all. The observation, and forgive me please for getting down in the weeds, but is on page 121 and refers to re-referrals, and also the old chestnut, which I've mentioned at meetings in the past, on page 157, which is all to do with missing children, return interviews, etc. That's the level of the detail that I just wanted to highlight. The history lesson, if I may, is from 100 years ago, practically to the day, when Sigmund Freud, who as you know is the father of psychoanalysis, came up with the definition of trauma. And he defined trauma as an event of such emotional significance that it simply smashes through the body's natural defences and floods it with an uncontrollable anxiety. I mention that in the context of previous comments that have been made, and in particular in Wendy Williams' I thought quite outstanding report on sufficiency. But if we all think back at 1 year, and we remember when we first heard of COVID and lockdown and all the rest of it, I would challenge one person in this country not to say that they didn't feel a level of uncontrollable anxiety, however they may or may not have portrayed it. If one works that down through the children for whom we are responsible, or the council is responsible, it would not be unreasonable to assume in the history of other major events that have happened, other traumas if you like, that the impact on children will be considerable. Adverse childhood experience is something, of course, we're all coherent with. And therefore, as we emerge from this period of extended lockdown, and probably over the next 6 months, it will not be unreasonable to assume that a lot of these adverse childhood experiences will be observed by schools and by other people in terms of children's behaviour. And again, Wendy's report raised that very well, and Rob England referred to the child protection issues that are likely to be highlighted. So boiling all that down, and I apologise for the slightly long preamble, but I wanted to put it in context. My direct question for you, Chris, if I may, is what thought has been given to the likely increase in demand for children's services as the coronavirus lockdowns dissipate? And specifically, if you like, can you provide the committee with assurance that you have the capacity and resources to meet that likely demand? Thank you.
Excellent question, Richard. Chris, can you respond?
Yeah, it's excellent for you, Chair. I've got to try and answer it. It's not so great for me. But no, it is a very, very helpful question, actually, because it raises the issue of latent demand in the system. And I do think children's services is a bit like a coiled spring. And when schools open their doors more widely in the weeks ahead, it's only then that we'll begin to understand what that latent demand will look like in terms of quantum. So we've done actually quite a lot of work on predictive analytics over the last few months to try and assess what that demand will manifest like going forward. And we have taken some steps already in anticipation of that latent demand coming through the system. So I've set aside £400,000 in the budget to employ additional staff, and where possible, if we've got a very good agency social worker that's coming to the end of their contract, we are retaining them in anticipation of needing them at some point in the very near future. So I'm sure that that's not going to cover the latent demand that's in the system. And it may still yet be a little while before that shows itself, because schools are so busy at the moment testing, dealing with remote learning, and all the other things that COVID, all the other pressures that have COVID has brought down on schools, that space for young children, and older children, for talking to teachers may not be there immediately. So, this latent demand may not kind of begin to show itself perhaps until as late as September. And that's assuming we don't have another lockdown, which of course we can't rule out. So I hope that goes some way to reassuring you, Richard, because we've given a lot of thought to it. We've had 2 or 3 reports on latent demand and predictive analytics, which we could bring forward to this committee if you were interested in seeing. And we have made some provision in anticipation for increased demand when schools reopen from next week.
Chris, I've got Leslie Barley, and that's it. Richard. Actually, Richard, do you want to come back in on that?
Just quickly wanted to say I have regular meetings with equivalents to myself in the Southwest, and all councils are waiting for this latent demand to come through. They've got preparations in place exactly the same as Chris has said, and Gail Hancock manages these on a weekly basis in the Bronze meeting as a regular discussion point with all the heads of service. So we are waiting to see what comes our way, but there is good plans in place, and nowhere in the Southwest has seen any rise, and they're all in the same position as us. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think that was really helpful. Leslie and Barley, I'd like to cut it off there because we are running short in time and we haven't even done our budget monitoring yet. So over to you, Leslie.
Very much, and Richard Castle, thank you for asking that question. It is so important and slightly reassuring to think that it is being considered, because we need to know what can be put in place now rather than when it hits us. Slightly boringly, I wanted to refer to the up-to-date dental checks, which I see is in red, and it is something which I've raised, Richard's raised in the past, and we had been reassured that it was improving. So can we? It is important. Well, it's all important. But if I could, just get that to be highlighted again, comes up regularly at corporate parenting, please. And that amongst there are other things, and the repeat referrals is also there. But if we could possibly have a report on why dental checks aren't being provided or followed through, that'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Gail's been doing quite a lot of work with our health partners on dental checks. They do have slight air cover on this, in that the provision of dental services is the responsibility of NHS England, and they and the CCG has written to NHS England about this lack of provision, and they have made some adjustments to enable children to have face-to-face dental care where emergencies arise. But Gail, do you want to say a bit more? Have I covered everything or around dental checks, or is there more happening? It's certainly an issue we've raised, isn't it?
Yeah, Gail, if you could come in.
Yes, yeah, no problem. Yeah, we certainly have raised it, and our CCG health colleagues have certainly raised it, as Chris has indicated, with NHS England, because they are, of course, responsible for dental services. Most high street dental services have been closed throughout the pandemic. However, in terms of children in care, we have always had a local arrangement that has enabled us to fast track any child or young person who requires emergency dental care, and we've used that facility with good effect on a few occasions when we've had to. So that's never been a problem. What we know is that we haven't given assurances about this being an area of performance that will improve, because it will only improve once we've got the opportunity to be able to book children back up to have regular checks. And we've obviously nearly been in a year of not being in that position. So whilst we've covered emergencies, the routine checks, which of course is what this key performance indicator is measured by, we've not been in that position. The most recent correspondence, which Councillor Boyles will know about, because this is definitely an issue that we've discussed at the Corporate Parenting Board, is we've had a recent letter to indicate the way in which we anticipate the improvements and the adjustments being made as we start to exit the third lockdown and hopefully get back to some sense of whatever our new normal is going to be. So that's the position at the moment, and that's why the key performance indicator is in red. But there has been work, and will continue to be work, to make the reasonable adjustments that we need to make. We are anticipating that children in our care will be fast-tracked and prioritised. That's what is being offered to us at the point that we have got local dental practices open and able to pick up the slack, so to speak. So that's probably all that I could say now, but I would anticipate that from the 8th of March, which is only next week now, when all children start to go back to school and we start to hopefully realise the roadmap that has been outlined for the whole country, we will start to see some of these issues start to shift. I hope that's helpful.
That's great, Gail. Yes, 8th of March is important. Schools back, and I suppose political parties are allowed to start delivering literature again. Barley, I've got you. I think you've got the last speaker, the last questioner.
Hi, yeah, I just wanted to ask the question of why is the target for care leavers in education, employment, and training only at 55%?
Yeah, good question, Barley. And again, it kind of nails one of the key issues, and it kind of relates to Dr. Richard Castle's question as well, because I agree with him that ultimately, when the dust settles on COVID, the group that will be seen to have suffered the most are young people. And I don't say that meaning to make light of the tragedies that people have suffered, but we've lost a year of education in effect. And although schools have done a fantastic job in doing their best under very difficult circumstances, there's no substitute for that lost year. And certainly the issue you raised is something that Richard and I talk about regularly. And I brought to his attention a few months ago now that the unemployment rate, or those young people not in what I call purposeful activity, i.e. education, employment or training, in the last 2.5 years has gone up from something like between 800 and 900 to 3,500. And if you are a young person trying to get into work at the moment, the challenge is enormous. And it's not just those young people without qualifications, it's graduates as well. It's young people across the board. And I think having lost education and educational opportunities, there could be consequences for young people for life unless we get this right. So certainly one of the things that we're doing as an employer is we're wholeheartedly embracing the Kickstart program, which is the government's program to try and help address this issue. And we're offering 298 apprenticeships across the local authority, health, police and other public services. We've already placed our first young person. They're in environmental services under Colin Chick's watch. And I'm looking forward to trying to place all 298 posts and fill them with young people. But there's a lot more to do. If I say there's 3,500 and we've got 300 as part of that program, then we've still got some way to go, haven't we? But ultimately, the problem will only be resolved when the economy picks up and real jobs then are created within the economy that will accommodate young people. But there's a lot of work to be done in this area, and you've raised a really business critical priority for us.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Are there any other questions on the performance report? And thank you for that, Barley. Now, I think out of all this, the most critical question is Richard's question. It's about latent demand, and I'm sure that's something that this committee is going to want to look at in the new council. Now, we've got the revenue budget monitoring. I know Suzanne joined this call some time ago, so thank you very much for your patience, Suzanne. Would you like to take us through the report?
Thanks, Chair. Just to flag really on the latent demand, and just to give some, the council will be receiving a COVID grant in the first few months of the new financial year. And as Chris has already said, we have put commitments for children and young people against that grant, knowing that the position will go on throughout this year, impacting on children's services. So just to reassure the committee that there is, it is recognised at senior levels that there will need to be some resource put into children's to offset what could be latent demand and COVID related costs into the new year. So just to reassure the committee, that is already being considered, and early commitments have gone forward. So I think, Leslie, the grant is about, I think it's around 11 million-ish, but that will still need to be confirmed. So that's across the council. So it's all being looked at the moment and being considered moving forward. In terms of the report, I won't go through it in detail, but just to highlight a few things for the committee to note. Since the last report, which was the forecast to October, this is the forecast completed in December. The position has improved by £1 million, and that is to do with changes in two things really. Homeschool transport costs have come down significantly to do with receiving more grant from the government to offset COVID costs. And also we've reviewed the routes, having gone into September and October and caught up on workload. Those routes now are meaning that we will pay less than what we'd have previously forecast. So that's a really good positive position. The other positive position, which is contributing to this, is the work that Gail and her team have been doing, and Chris with the Academy as well is setting up, is the position on safeguarding staff, where we've seen agency numbers reducing, and we've seen savings there from what we originally forecast during the year. So that position has really improved, and we're looking at, with the new ASYEs as well, that's really helping to reduce agency staff, again, where appropriate, to ensure that we've got a more stable workforce. So two really important changes. External placement budgets, what we're seeing is increasing costs, but a lot of those are to do with COVID related transitions for care leavers and also external placements as well, and the market and shoring up that. So overall position is improving on the non-DSG side. Again, within DSG, although we've seen a slight increase in the forecast position, what we're seeing recently over the last few months is that the position is coming back to the deficit budget that we set. So we are seeing an improving position on the DSG. Clearly still a lot of pressure because the deficit budget was set at 5.4 million. So clearly that is a pressure that we're seeing at the moment. So just some of the real highlights of the report for the committee to note.
Very much, Suzanne. Now, a couple of people have mentioned they need to leave at 1 o'clock. I have no hands showing. Can it be? Or maybe we're getting close to lunch, I don't know.
Chair, could I just add something? And if Wendy's still here, I might bring her back. But the other thing that I'm very pleased about is that while it looks as though we've stabilised costs actually around placements for the last 3 or 4 months, it might have gone up a little. But what we mustn't lose sight of is that I think it was within the last year, the last 12 months, we have had an extra 60 young people requiring placements, and costs haven't gone up in proportion to that number. So in other words, the work that Wendy is doing around sufficiency and creating better quality and better value for money placements is beginning to show within the budget and work through. And similarly, the work that Gail's doing around improving practice so that we make good decisions in a timely way rather than, in a chaotic last minute way, is also inextricably linked to value for money. So I think as practice improves and our placement offer becomes richer, the budget comes into line. They're all inextricably linked. You can't do one without the other. And because we're heading in the right direction, we're also seeing greater control. I think, I'm not going to fetter Suzanne's discretion, but I think, I would certainly argue that we are seeing the budget now being one that's coming back into control and is being managed more effectively.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Chris. Well, I have no more questions on this agenda item, and I do think we need to give some time to the work programme. So I suggest we move straight on to that one. Thank you very much, Suzanne, for today and for all the other revenue budget monitoring papers that you've provided the committee in the last 4 years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Andrea, it's over to you for the work programme.
Hi, well actually it's over to the whole committee for the work plan. The document I attached to the agenda was obviously deliberately left very open because obviously very much wanted guidance from members. But I mean, one of the things that I would like to say is that we are entering into a new council. There will be new members of the committee. So there will need to be a balance between overview, in other words, explaining the role of children's services and how all the partnerships interlink, and as well as doing the scrutiny side of it. So clearly you're going to need to actually keep that improvement journey, scrutinisation trajectory going, but at the same time, you know, give yourselves the space to be able to make sure that new members of the committee understand the issues, understand underneath the issues as well. So, and that's all I'd really like to say. Obviously, throughout the discussion this morning, I've been picking up pointers, but really I'd like to hand it over to members to put forward their perspective.
Andrea, did you have anything you wanted to share? I know I had a couple of ideas to send through. Were you going to share them on the screen?
I can attempt to do that, assuming that the IT doesn't let me down like it did yesterday evening, so bear with me.
Would it be quicker if you just did speaking?
Well, possibly. I'll just give. Oh yeah, we've got. I've got Colin. I've noted Colin wants to speak as well.
Yes, please. So would I.
And okay, so I've got Colin and Leslie. But if we just go through these, which a list I came up with. Oh, it's gone. We had it. So I guess the first one was care leavers offer and an update on where we are with that. I know that's something that Richard Ball has told me he's been looking at, and I think Chris, you could probably update us on that. But I think it would be good to get an update at committee. And linked with that, the second one is a review of the Bright Spot survey.
Andrew, can I ask a question? Isn't the care leavers offer something that sits with the corporate parenting group?
Yes, but we still want to. It does sit with the corporate parenting group in the first instance, but I think it would still be of interest to the committee.
Okay.
And there is, and we are working on updating it. So once that has been updated, I think it's something that needs to be brought to the committee. I think when we looked at the issue of education under COVID in September, I think there was a feeling from the committee that we thought that we would need an update a year later. So that's something perhaps for the autumn for us to look at. I would like, and this may be more of something for the new committee chair to talk about with the senior officers, but I think the way that we use and understand comparative data, I think can be improved. And I went on a session with the LGA recently, and there is some work that's being done with MV on being able to make more comparisons with statistical neighbours so that we can get a better idea of what the data actually means. But I think actually possibly a session on how we use and understand performance data would be useful. Likewise, I think looking at the style of reports, are they user friendly for the general public? Are they free of jargon? Do they get to the point in simple language? I think is something else that we should look at. Remembering that these are public meetings, they are not just for the committee, they are also for the public who want to see these services being scrutinised. Linked with the IT issues, I think, is how Children's Services innovates using the latest technology. I'm thinking of information technology here. Perhaps Trevone House 1 year on, together perhaps with the plans for Trevone House 2 and 3, which we've been talking about, but it'd be good to get an update on that. I think it'd be good to get a visit to the MASH. I think it'd be interesting from a sort of HRE type perspective to think about how we motivate staff in children's services to do the best that we can. So that's a kind of like a more of a provision side rather than an end side, but I think it'd still be useful to look at. I think focused on early years and early help. I'm sure you'd support me in that, Leslie. Revisiting permanent exclusion schools. I think actually Andrea had already picked that up. Revisiting the strategy for autism, Asperger's, and perhaps adding on gender dysphoria as well. Might seem like a strange combo, but I think there are some links. We do have an autism strategy, which was being developed, but I'd like to see how the development of that and the practice of that has gone on. Fostering an adoption, I think, are things that we ought to look at. Just because Adoption West is the agency for adoption, nonetheless, the authority still has responsibility up until the point that we get that care order. So that's still an area which can be legitimately scrutinised. How we learn from past mistakes and serious case reviews. How have the lessons been from previous serious cases reviews been implemented? I think is something, and an update on children's mental health. And going back, I know this is a link with health, but it does need to be scrutinised somewhere. If not here, then certainly in health, but we need to make sure that's being done. So those are the things that, the only other thing that occurred to me was to have a refresher train on scrutiny, and perhaps have some people from different organisations in. NSPCC, for example, is one that springs to mind, to give us an independent view on whether or not we are being effective as a scrutiny committee. So those are some of the things that I thought would be worthwhile thinking about in the new council. Although, of course, it will be for the new committee to decide on its work programmes. These can only be suggestions. So I think Colin, you wanted to comment, and then Leslie. Colin?
Yeah, I just stopped my video because of the problems before. On item 13, learning from safeguarding, I think that there's a piece of work being done looking back historically at some of the reviews. I think it would be, it's one of the things I mentioned before, is that we look at the recommendations of, let's say, historic safeguarding reviews, and look at what was the proposed mitigation, if you like, not mitigation, but proposed changes to stop it happening again, and just make sure that those changes have actually worked. Because if after each serious case review, or a number of them, the same thing is being raised, clearly what we tried to put in place hasn't worked. So I think that one is quite important. And I think maybe we should be asking our ambassadors if they feel that there's something that we've missed and would be really important to be discussed by the committee.
Yes, I think we definitely should ask our ambassadors. We have at least one, possibly more, still on. Barley's still on. Is Becca's still on? So we have two ambassadors on the call today, and I would definitely like the ambassadors' input into suggestions for the work plan for the committee for the next council. So Barley, Becca, suggestions, please, all of them to Andrea.
I think, Becca, did you want to go? No, you go.
Okay, both. I think just to help you out here, the chairman wasn't trying to put you on the spot. If you want to have time to think about it, then email me. Obviously copy Lynn in so that we're all on the same page. But don't feel you have to suddenly come up with something now. Just make sure you contact me, and we can take it forward. And I will inform the committee members, obviously.
Yeah, I think Lynn's mentioned that's something we can take to our wider team meetings.
Yeah. So do that. Take it to the ambassadors' team meetings. Come up with your own list and email it to Andrea, and she can pass on to the new committee and the new council to add to the list we've already got. Leslie, can I bring you in, please?
very much. I think that however the new scrutiny committee is made up, some basic training is going to be, I would like to think is going to be included, so people on the committee are informed, so they know what pupil premium means, they know how it should be used, and all those various other areas, because otherwise they come at it completely cold. And even if there's benchmarking, which might give them some guidance on where the council sits with other councils, it's still their heads are in a place of not really understanding what's going on. So the more I think that can be done to give people as much information about how children and family services work, the better. So there's that. Thank you for mentioning the revisit to the exclusions work, because that needs to be well and truly understood. And the one area I think we don't spend enough time on, and it has been highlighted on the improvement board, is education plans for people who are at the virtual school. So I think that that would be something I would like us to keep an eye on, and pick up from my earlier question about what does the next committee need to be looking at, what are the areas of concern that might sit within the children families team, senior members, as in officers. We ought to know what they are so that we can keep an eye on it, or it can be kept an eye on depending on the makeup of the committee.
Thank you. I definitely think the point about having some more basic training, even just on terminology, I think useful, because children's services is a very broad area. There's a number of subspecialisms within it, and even keeping track of the terminology and the abbreviations will be quite hard work if you're a generalist counsellor with no particular professional background in the field. So thank you. I think that would be very useful. I sense we're coming towards the end of our time here. There was one apology I should have made, actually, which is, had this been a physical meeting, I would have brought donuts, and I'm not being able to do that. Should I find myself in the position of being the chair of the next committee in the new council, which is not certain at all, but is at least, I suppose, possible, then I will endeavour to do so. I don't think...
Chair,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but Richard Castle has raised his hand.
Oh, I beg your pardon, I didn't see that. Richard.
Sorry, guys. I didn't want to delay or to stop your latest speech, Andrew. I was just confused by one thing, which was to do with the Asperger's, autism, and gender dysmorphia. I mean, to be honest, don't see those specifics as being relevant to this committee, but it might be relevant in the future to do a deep dive into children with specific disadvantages, which would include people with learning difficulties such as autism, challenges such as Asperger's, and of course the gender dysmorphia issue would be really a health one. So I think we just need to be a bit careful in terms of terminology on that, without taking away from the merit in looking at people with particular disadvantages. Just a small point, Andrew. Sorry.
Thank you, Richard. I'm sure we can phrase that more appropriately. But I think the general theme of learning disabilities, I think, is an important one, and disability and health issues. Chris.
Thanks, Chair. I think those topics are all relevant and interesting. Just to point your attention to the chat, Barley has raised the issue of safeguarding training, just to build on what Leslie has said about basic training for members. The other thing, just a gentle nudge, I suppose, and I'm as guilty as this as anyone, because we are in intervention because of safeguarding predominantly, but the scope of CFOSC does include education, and while education does feature on that list in terms of exclusions and some of the specific cohorts of young people, but we do have some challenges in education in Gloucestershire, not just the overall performance of schools, but the variability of performance and that gap in achievement between the general population and children who are in challenging circumstances. And you could add to that some very poor performing schools in Gloucester City itself. And you have challenged the RSC since my time of being here, and it might be quite timely and helpful to me if you at some point in the future recalled her to give account of what the strategy is to improve academies in Gloucester City, because at the moment we have something like 4,000 children in inadequate or failed academies. Now, they don't always show up on the Ofsted list because there's a different way of categorising schools once you become an academy. But I am working well now with the RSC, and we do have in draft form a joint education strategy, which I'm hoping to get the Regional Schools Commissioner to sign off on, and the Head of Education for the diocese, and the chairs of the head teacher associations, so that we can collectively begin to address some of these issues. So that might be a topic which you think could be of interest to the committee.
Andrew, can I just come back on that? Because I put a motion to council which was supported in November 2019, asking that we'd start to understand the makeup of schools where they're not doing very well. Now, I can't remember the actual wording of the motion. It was a question at the last council meeting: why has nothing been done about this? And the motion and the fact that nothing's been done about it and asking for a working group to look at it fits well with what Chris has just said. You know, we do really need to understand why it is that I can think of a particular school where you look at the makeup, the intake of it, and the fact that it's failing. We don't know enough about it. So I would really strongly say that is something that needs a lot of attention if we are to make sure that all young people who require education in this county go to schools where they can thrive.
Thank you. Yes. It would be good to look at that. I have concerns about the schools in Gloucester. I haven't said too much about it as a committee because I thought it would end up getting too parochial, because it's a particular constituency issue of mine, and I've been in dialogue with the RSC outside of this committee in relation to constituency matters. But I think Chris makes a good point, and you make a good point too. In terms of timing, we probably ought to take something on education through COVID first, but that I would have thought would have been the priority. But I think you're right, it does need to be on that plan, and I do wonder whether we could get through all of those in a full year. Actually, possibly not.
At one time there was going to be somebody brought in to do to looking at the work that was being asked for out of my motion. So that might be work that is done by somebody independent and then comes back to the scrutiny committee for the committee members to look at and understand and see, because it will show what's happening. So that might be a way round of doing it, so that it wouldn't be down to this committee to do it. It would be down to, say, somebody, I think, independent, because that way you get a more authoritative take on things, and then it comes back to committee.
Yeah, okay, no, it's a good point. Andrea?
I was just going to say, I think what might help is if I track back from the original motion to where we are now, and then obviously see how that fits in to the work plan. I mean, obviously as well, what we have is a new Director of Education who is starting in her position later this year. So I think obviously having her come to committee and talk about, as a new person in post, what does she see as the challenges going forward, and how she will be taking those forward with the Regional Schools Commissioner, given the number of academies in the county. And of course, Councillor Patrick has also messaged me to remind members that she still feels very passionately that bullying needs to be looked at And again, that is something that I had flagged on to a draft work plan that we would need to talk to the Director of Education about, given the complexities around responsibility, you know, with academies. So I just wanted to kind of say that I think in terms of Leslie's, I'll track back and liaise with officers about where we are.
Great, thanks very much, Andrea. Is there any other business? I believe it's not. Stephen?
Can I just make a comment, please? As the time has gone along, I've realised that we're now scrutinising to a far greater depth than ever before, which is good, and that's what scrutiny group should be doing. But the downside of it is that it puts time pressures on people to finish in half a day. And sometimes that's just not possible, is it?
No, well, they're long half days, aren't they?
Yeah, but we're getting there. You know, the deeper you dive, the longer it takes.
It does. Andrea?
I was going to say that that's a key point, because the thing that has struck me very much, you know, recently is the length of time on meetings, which is I don't have a problem with at all. But I think it is going forward over the next year, whoever is on this committee, it may be that we have to set up additional briefings, not necessarily committee meetings, to actually, I don't know who that was, to actually, thank you. Sorry, I've lost my track now. So we will need to kind of set up briefings alongside committee meetings to get the overview side of things, to make sure that members are informed, whilst at the same time scrutinising. And I think perhaps one of the learnings that this committee wants to inform the next committee about is, you know, look at the agenda, consider how long, you know, you want to discuss items, and, you know, the impact on individual members as well, because some members do work, which is why we look at half days for these meetings. So there are a lot of complexities around setting up a structured work plan, but, you know, we can do it.
Yeah, this is something I've always had a problem with, because we're on this scrutiny committee to scrutinise things, and yes, the agendas, you know, they are the meetings are long, and to shortchange any of the topics we cover would be a disgrace, particularly as children's services is currently being it needs to improve. And I think if Ofsted were to come along and say, let's have a look at how your scrutiny meetings run, and to see that the topics weren't given, you know, full consideration, I would be very worried as an Ofsted inspector, saying, do these members take this seriously? Are they prepared to put the work in? So I think we do need to consider. I think the agendas are long, but maybe we need to meet more often. And I've said this in the past, and it's always been my concern about how scrutiny works. I think select committees work well, because that allows you to take a particular topic and look at it properly, and people are informed. But so often we see on these committees, people are asking for sort of good training at the beginning, so people understand what each bit of the children's services covers. You know, people need to take time to inform themselves as much as anything. But I think to shortchange the topics we cover in this particular area would be wrong, particularly with the sword of Damocles in the shape of Ofsted hanging over us.
So if I could just come back on that, that was not what I meant. I just meant about getting the balance right, which is why I was suggesting briefings alongside. I mean, those members who have been working with this committee as long as I have will know that actually when Councillor Stephen Macmillan was chairing this committee, we actually did do the first select committee approach when we were concerned about, or when you were concerned about some issues to do with schools, and called the Schools Forum members in, and did a very long day's meeting at that. So what my point was is that it's about getting the right things on the agenda and scrutinising them well, whilst also trying to achieve a balance, which we may be doing in other ways in terms of doing the briefings alongside, to make sure that members are informed. I mean, one of the issues going forward is whether or not we will continue to be allowed to meet virtually. Because the legislation says that has to end on 7th of May, although there are steps being taken to extend that. because I think if we can continue to meet virtually, certainly for briefings going forward, then we'll get a lot more input from members, because I've noticed that it's easier for members to drop in virtually and really focus down than actually the additional travel time to Shire Hall. So I think, like I said before, it's a very complex situation, but we can get it sorted.
Right. Thank
you. Andrea, my comments were not in no way a get at you. So please don't feel the need to be defensive. It really wasn't. I think members need to take this seriously. I've made my feelings known about this. I'm not saying anything I haven't said before. So I think you do a great job. Please don't think this is in any way aimed at you. I think it is actually up to members to take it seriously. And that is something I do feel very strongly about.
Yeah, I think I feel strongly about it too, Leslie. And I think we do give proper time to scrutiny here. We've had at least 2 extra sessions this year, haven't we, Andrea? At least 2. And so there's been no lack of time made available. The meetings have tended to go on to about 1:30 as today. So I think we have given it the time. If there is room for streamlining without reducing the quality of scrutiny, then that's something that I would be looking for. But of course, it's in the hands of the new committee, not necessarily in my hands. Okay. Thank you to everybody for your time today and over the last 4 years. And goodbye. I may or may not see you in the new council.